In 1927, studio head Louis B. Mayer had a dream to unite the 5 branches of the film industry: actors, directors, producers, technicians, and writers. His dream was to stop them all from unionizing so that he could continue to reap the rewards of their hard work and live the life he had become accustomed to. So he summoned 36 of the most prestigious names of the time to a banquet and explained his plans. And after collecting $100 from each of them, they formed the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. I found that the best way to handle filmmakers was to hang medals all over them. If I got them cups and awards, they'd kill to produce what I wanted, old Louis B. said. And on November 18th, 1932, back in the Fiesta Room at the Ambassador Hotel, the 5th Academy Awards were held. And today, many, many years later, Moronic Logic is proud to present Golden Boy! Welcome to the 5th Academy Awards from 1932. Tonight's nominees for Golden Boy: The Smiling Lieutenant by Ernst Lubitsch, Bad Girl by Frank Borzage, 5-Star Final by Mervyn LeRoy, The Champ by King Vidor, Arrowsmith by John Ford, Shanghai Express by Joseph von Sternberg, 1 Hour with You by Ernst Lubitsch and George Cukor, and Grand Hotel by Edmund Golden. Wait a minute, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Ruben Mamoulian? Welcome to the 5th Academy Awards and Golden Boy, Episode 5, the only show where a movie not nominated for the Oscars might potentially win the Oscar. Our show, right here. I'm your host, Kenny Cahoon. You might know me from my other show, presenting Alfred Hitchcock on YouTube, the Hitchcock Challenge podcast. On that show, we do deep dives into every movie Alfred Hitchcock directed in chronological order. We do everything on the show in chronological order. We read books, we cite our sources, we spend a lot of time pouring through background information on those movies. This show, not so much. Every month on Golden Boy, I am joined by a friend, family member, co-worker, synchronized swimmer, expert, or a person I exchanged information with after a fender bender. And we watch every movie nominated for the Academy Awards in a given year. We let you know what to skip, what to watch, and what movie should have won the Golden Boy that year. They still aren't calling them Oscars yet. Maybe behind the scenes, there's rumblings behind the scenes, but they aren't at this point. We will let you know when they call them Oscars. We're going to let you know here on this show. I would like to thank Jessa Goldstein, the executive producer of this show, responsible for sneaking into the UCLA archives and filming the movies that we can't get our hands on. I would like to thank my Hitchcock cohorts, Sam Holland and Lance Hawthorne. That show releases new episodes on the 15th of every month on podcast. New episode will be premiering December 15th, The Ring, right here on our YouTube channel. And I'd like to thank this week's guest. I might know her from high school, where she changed the course of my life by introducing this brooding skateboarder to J.D. Salinger, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Milan Kundera, Ivan Klim, the Velvet Underground, Bob Dylan, Miles Davis, jazz music in general, and pretty much everything cool. We traveled cross country together, coast to coast on the Greyhound bus with episode 1 co-host Cyrus in tow when we were all 18, and that was an adventure. She is currently a professor of history, literature, and the arts. She's a published writer. One of her essays, Link's Search for Meaning, can be found in the book The Legend of Zelda in Philosophy. I link Therefore I Am, available on Amazon and all your favorite bookstores and Kindles. She is a playwright. Her carefully researched adaptation of Sophocles' play Oedipus Rex has been performed multiple times around New England. She's funny, charming, witty, a bad influence, and the smartest person I know. I'd like to welcome Toni Fellela.
Thank you. Thank you for such a warm welcome.
That's what we do here. It's awesome that you're on the show. Thanks for doing this, Toni.
Yeah.
You excited? Did you watch all 8?
Yes, I watched all of them.
You've watched all 8 of these movies.
9.
9, because I threw in a curveball. Yeah, we are watching. We watched Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Now, you people at home, you're probably saying, you guys are going to pick another movie that wasn't nominated for the Academy Awards. And I wouldn't blame you for thinking we're up to no good again this time. But we're reviewing Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde for a reason. And Toni, I told you the reason, right?
Yes, I think so, because of the tie for Best Actor.
First tie. Not many. I think there was only one other tie afterwards. It was Barbra Streisand and I'll have to look at my notes on that one. It was in 1968. Barbra Streisand and I think... What's up, true believers? Kenny in the editing booth. There have been 2 ties in Academy Award history for Best Actor or Actress. The second one, after this one, was 1969, Barbra Streisand and Katharine Hepburn. That's who you were looking for, Kenny. Okay, back to you. Okay, yeah, the reason we're talking about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is because Wallace Beery and Frederick March tied for Best Actor that year. And we on this show hate ties, even though we have ties every episode. And we want to try and break it right here live. So we're going to talk about those movies. And at the end, before we give a Golden Boy, we will select one of those as Best Actor. So Toni, I ask everybody when we start the show, what do you know about this time period from your history books? And
yeah, I'm glad you asked that to Lance, because then I was prepared for you to ask me. What do I know about this time period? I know from American literature that we're looking at 2 sort of artistic moments. We're looking at both realism and modernism. Realism, which was kind of having its upsurgence right after the Civil War, attends to the fact that no character, no person is either wholly good or wholly bad. So that duality of man that I think you see in a lot of these films, obviously the Jekyll and Hyde one, but modernism in that more and more creative works are looking at subjectivity, so multiple perspectives, which I think you see in some of the ensemble ones like Shanghai Express or Grand Hotel. Also, non-linear storytelling, which I'm not too sure if that happens here. Aside from that, in 1932, we get FDR and his New Deal as an answer to the Depression.
I was going to title this episode "The Jazz Age," the end of the Jazz Age. So this is what's great is having you on for this episode, because you're probably more of an expert in literature than film. For the lay person at home, what was the Jazz Age? What was that period and what was going on during it?
Fitzgerald had written an essay in 1931 called Echoes of the Jazz Age, where he says, it was an age of miracles. It was an age of art. It was an age of excess, and it was an age of satire. And I think those final 2, the excess and satire, is a good clue on how to read these movies, especially since I was initially hesitant that having, 2 musicals would mean we were in for a lot of very saccharine, romantic melodrama that was more about entertainment than art. But I think everything, even the musicals, are cut through with a satirical edge that makes us kind of question our received notions about hierarchy in the society.
Yeah, you're expecting like those later kind of Hollywood musicals that are more toned down, like these.
Maybe post, like the Code ones.
Yeah, post-Code movies. These movies are all pre-Code. The Motion Picture Production Code, or the Hays Code, as we described back in episode 3, outlawed profanity, nudity, graphic or realistic violence, rape, same-sex relationships, as well as relationships between people of different races, and what I'm about to describe here. The bad guy always had to be a bad guy. If you were committing a crime, you were supposed to pay the penalty for it. To me, one of the best movies that came out in 1932, which was not nominated for the Oscars, and we didn't watch. I considered making you watch it, but we're already watching too much stuff. And I would probably pick it as Best Picture if I'd included it, is Scarface, 1932. I watched that recently. It is so good, and it is encompasses all of the pre-Code elements. There's so much seediness about it, but you're dealing with this really seedy character who's doing crimes and killing people, but you like him. And then when things start to not go well for that character, you get totally sucked in. He seriously is Benicio del Toro, like 100 years ago, the actor playing him. But anyway, so the Jazz Age, there's this freedom to these filmmakers are putting in. It's not watered down by the corporate interests, by Louis B. Mayer and his cronies.
Yeah, I would say a big important thing in this moment The Jazz Age is an interesting term because it's sort of co-opting Black art for white audiences to a certain extent. But if you look at the way Black artists were actually talking about Black art with the Harlem Renaissance, you see a lot of them pushing back against what people call the politics of respectability, the idea that we put all these kind of arbitrary social mores that act as an additional tool of oppression or repression. And the literature of that time, and I would say also a lot of these films, push back against that. They push back against sort of irrelevant or arbitrary politics of respectability, of what makes a person good.
All right, just to brush through a couple of things people should know about this time too. Empire State Building's just been built and just been opened to people. I got this great book, The 20th Century by Year, that I found in my basement, actually. And it happens to have a lot of really interesting things. The Charles Lindbergh baby was killed right before this Academy Awards. F.D. Roosevelt is elected president. And Hattie Caraway became the first woman to serve in the Senate when her husband died. I also put down on July 18th, this is July 8th, this is the relative part to our show. The Dow Jones reached its lowest level of the Great Depression, bottoming out at 41.22. I don't know what that means. But in the winter of 1932, movie attendance plummeted. Jobless people had been flocking to the cinemas just to spend their time, and eventually they ran out of money. And so right around the time of this Academy Awards, the bottom falls out. People aren't going to the movies. And before the next episode, there's going to be a lot of changes. The next Oscars after this is like a year and a half later. And a lot happens in that time period with the Academy, with the actors, with the writers. Everybody is mad at everybody. We'll get into that next episode. But that just sets the stage of we're at this turning point right now. And to me, all of these movies represent that era, the end of an era, the end of like this kind of freedom that maybe these creators had.
Yeah, I read something this morning that said at this time, 1 out of every 4 workers were unemployed, which is just staggering to think about the amount of depression, frustration, and rage that are boiling, and you would think at that time, I think people read that people wanted a distraction from their entertainment, which could be true to an extent. But I think they also want social critique and commentary, which we also see kind of subtly woven into all of these films.
These movies kind of, I feel like you can relate more to if you're in a suffering, especially like The Champ or something. Like they're kind of about poor people, which I feel like Hollywood, and again, I haven't watched all the movies going forward at the Oscars, but I feel like the direction we're moving is towards something like Grand Hotel, where it's people with the wealth. We don't really know we know they're wealthy. We don't really know how we don't see them working, and it's their stories, and then we're kind of forever watching and like, wishful, what if I lived that life?
But there are a few in Grand Hotel, like the disgruntled employee about to die, or the stenographer, or the grifter. So even in something like that, which could be read and promoted as this glamorous ensemble cast, still has, and I don't know if that goes away in Hollywood, but I think to a certain extent it does. Even today, I found a lot of these movies more progressive than I expected.
All right, you ready to start talking about these movies?
Of course.
All right, we're going to start off with this one, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I'm really interested in hearing what you think, but let me read a synopsis really quickly for the people at home. Directed by Ruben Mamoulian, it ran for 98 minutes, stars Miriam Hopkins as Ivy Pearson and Frederick March as Dr. Henry Jekyll and Mr. Edward Hyde. March is one of the people we're evaluating his acting style when we watch this movie. Miriam Hopkins was also in one of the musicals, wasn't she? She was in The Smiling Lieutenant. She was the queen she's kind of a country bumpkin queen, and then she learns to, she gets Pretty Woman by the end of the movie. So this movie received 3 nominations at this Academy Awards. Actor Frederick March, he won, tied with Wallace Beery. The cinematographer Carl Strauss, and writing Percy Heath and Samuel Hoffenstein. The film is an adaptation of Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the 1886 Robert Louis Stevenson tale of a man who takes a potion that turns him from a mild-mannered man of science into a homicidal maniac. The film was made before the full enforcement of the production code, and it is remembered today for its strong sexual content, embodied mostly in the character of the bar singer Ivy Pearson. And when it was re-released later, they had to cut 8 minutes of the movie out because it was just too seedy. But that has been since re-added in modern times. There's a really dramatic transformation in this. Those scenes, how they do the transition to Dr. Hyde was not revealed for decades. But in 1969, The Celluloid Muse, a volume of interviews with Hollywood directors, Mamoulian revealed that it was applied in contrasting colors. A series of colored filters that matched the makeup was used, which enabled the makeup to be exposed gradually or made invisible. The change in color was not visible on black and white film. John Barrymore was asked to play this part. He had played Hyde before in a silent version of this movie, but he was under contract at a different studio. So they got this guy, Frederick March, I guess, because he kind of has a John Barrymore vibe. So, all right, yeah, what did you think of this movie, Toni?
Well, I liked it. One of the things that surprised me was that as someone who's a fan of contemporary horror or horror of the late 20th century, how much sexuality as representing danger is still a present theme all these decades ago. I also thought there was kind of something about the realists where they would look at the duality of man. It reminded me of Carl Jung, this idea of the shadow self. And it's interesting because Jung recommends that, you integrate the shadow self, you acknowledge it, you recognize it, but Dr. Jekyll does the complete opposite here. Rather than acknowledge it, he tries to split it apart to have this sort of catharsis. So that doesn't work out for him. I would also say a connection that I noticed was this trope of what it means to be a man of science that we see in Shanghai Express and in Arrowsmith. And I would say in Arrowsmith, that's an uncritical representation. But the other films, especially this one, try to look at how the pursuit of science, blind to everything else, can be a curse or a fatal flaw.
Well, that's interesting because Frankenstein, too, had just come out, and that also deals with a scientist that, the mad scientist. Like, science is not a good thing, guys. You sent me a thing about Arrowsmith saying that that was the first portrayal, like, where the lead character was a scientist.
That was considered the first big science novel. And, Sinclair Lewis was looking to kind of critique the way that pharmaceutical companies were co-opting medicine. So he was for the man of science, but I wouldn't say this was against the man of science, but I think it shows how the sort of monomaniacal pursuit of science without any consideration of the human toll can be devastating.
This is why I love having you on for this episode, because I'm going to rewatch this later in the editing and then be like, oh my God, she's making such a great point on this. But in the moment, I'm just like, oh God. I thought that it was scary.
I mean, it was sexier than I expected. That leg dangling. Do you remember that scene?
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. No, it was sexy. I thought, compared to the other horror movies of this time that I watched, Dracula and Frankenstein, this was like blew them out of the water. And I think part of it is the danger of this movie is domestic violence, essentially.
Oh, yes.
He
Very well put.
wants to become Hyde so that he can take a woman home, like keep her kept, beat her up, do whatever he wants to her, and like with no guilt or shame, essentially as Hyde. And
which is troubling considering he thinks marriage is the solution. He keeps pressuring his fiance to marry him. But then you think once within the sanctity of marriage, what's going to happen to her?
He's just, all his wild fantasies would be let out. So I think this is an interesting movie in that. And I thought, since we're going to talk about Wallace Beery later, Frederick March, I do think playing both of these parts shows like an interesting range, because Hyde is presented as like this kind of subhuman character. Mm-hmm. He's almost like a monkey a little bit.
Yes, he's very animalistic. He looks like the Universal Horrors werewolf man or whatever,
I think for an attractive actor like Frederick March, like a good looking guy, to like lower him, like to do those things, like I feel like that takes like confidence and like a feeling like not being afraid to make yourself look kind of
ugly.
Yeah. And I think
that's probably why Brendan Fraser will get a nod for The Whale, despite that his problems.
The transformation. Yeah. I think Hollywood loves that. The Oscars love that when you really go against your own type. Mm-hmm. And he definitely does here. I mean, I think Jekyll is just, if he's just nominated for Jekyll, it's probably Okay.
One thing I wanted to ask about that, though, is do you know if March had a stunt double? Because I noticed when he was Jekyll, he would just leap over staircases. I mean, he was agile and athletic, and that was beyond impressive to me that he was able to do that.
I'm not 100% positive, but I would hedge that was him. And Kenny hedged wrong. Actor and stuntman Chick Collins, performing in his third movie, did the stunts here, although he is uncredited in the cast list. Back to you, Kenny. Yeah, all right. I don't want to spend too much time again on this movie, but I do feel like this is a good setup for the movies coming forward because this has all of that. It has the violence, the sexuality,
the two women.
The two women, right?
Chevalier. He would never hide out on someone.
No.
He'll just have both women and make them love it.
Maurice Chevalier doesn't need to become Hyde. All he has to do is wink and he gets
wink and sing.
Men, women, whatever. Maurice
Put on a little lipstick.
Gives a little cute nod and a wink, and you're in bed with him the next thing you know. All right, moving on. Well, before we move on real quickly. So did you like Frederick March's performance in here? Do you see why it would be Academy Award nominated, or do you feel
especially now with the context that you're explaining about allowing himself to sort of break that Hollywood heartthrob image by hiding out with the bad teeth or whatever. So I do see that the playing two roles, and especially one being so far out of type, is an additional challenge. So I see why he got the award, or tied with Wallace Fury.
Moving on. Where is he? Where are you? Okay, hooray.
Oh, I love him. That picture doesn't even do him justice.
The Smiling Lieutenant, August 1st, 1931. Director Ernst Lubitsch. I watched this on Criterion. It's on Criterion DVD behind me in an Ernst Lubitsch musicals collection. How did you watch this movie, Toni?
I believe I actually got some movies from the library. There's a collection of all his musicals, and that was both of our musicals are in that collection.
Do you use Canopy?
No, I actually got a physical DVD.
Oh, you got the physical. Nice. Shout out to libraries. You people at home, you don't always have to spend money on these things.
Oh, 100%. I actually got the Criterion Shanghai Express interlibrary loan from an out-of-state library. It only took about a week to come in. So
that's awesome.
It was so good. I'm so glad I watched that end commentary. She was amazing.
Oh yeah, we'll talk about that later for sure. I totally agree with you on that. Okay, where were we? The Criterion, Smiling Lieutenant, 89 minutes. I already said the director. Actress Claudette Colbert as Franzi, Maurice Chevalier as Lieutenant Nicholas Nicky Von Preen, and actress Miriam Hopkins from Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde as Princess Anna. This received one nomination just for the Best Picture. It was written from an opera, Ein Walzentraum, by Oscar Strauss, which in turn was based on the novel Nux, the Prince Consort. All right, let me do a little background on this movie really quickly. The film was not made under pleasant circumstances. Maurice Chevalier's mother had just died before making of this movie. I think when you want to talk about acting, like what the performance he puts on in here with that in mind in the background, he felt like all the smiles and cute winks that we love with him were like really hard for him to do in the performance of this. So I give him credit. There's some people that don't like Maurice Chevalier. I love him. I just enjoy his performances. But
why don't they like him? Too campy, or
I don't know, maybe it is the camp. I mean, a lot of these movies have a negative message towards women, I think, for sure. The one I did with Gavin, The Love Parade, not to rehash the whole thing, but the whole point was that women belong in the bedroom and men should be running everything.
If it's Chevalier, I'm okay with that.
All right, let's get into the synopsis for this movie. In Vienna. All right, by the way, these synopsises are either from Wikipedia, from me, or a combo of Wikipedia and me, because some of these are so poorly written on Wikipedia that I can't just count on them to always come through for us. Synopsis. In Vienna, Lieutenant Nicholas Nicky Von Preen meets Franzi, the leader of an all-female orchestra. They soon fall in love. While standing in formation at a parade honoring the visiting royal family of Flausenthurm, Nicky winks at Franzi in the crowd. Unfortunately, the gesture is intercepted by Anna, the princess of Flausenthurm. The naive princess takes offense. To assuage her, the lieutenant insists that he winked and smiled at her because of her beauty. This backfires, and a smitten Anna demands that she marry the lieutenant. Franzi leaves Nicky upon seeing him return in a royal carriage. After intervention by the Emperor of Austria, An international incident is narrowly averted by the marriage of the lieutenant and the princess, though the marriage is not consummated, as Nicky will only chastely kiss the bride and his father-in-law. Homesick and lovesick, Nicky wanders the streets and encounters Franzi, who has traveled with her orchestra to Flossenthurm to perform, and witnesses the wedding, unable to move on. The two resume their romance. Anna finds out and confronts Franzi. During the confrontation, Franzi realizes that the princess is in fact deeply in love with the lieutenant. She decides to save the marriage by giving the dowdy princess a makeover, and they sing the duet, Jazz Up Your Lingerie, before Franzi departs for good. The results are a complete success as the lieutenant returns home, follows his satin-clad, cigarette-puffing wife into the bedroom, and closes the door, opening it briefly to give the audience a last song and a suggestive wink.
Oh my God, I just love it so much more than I expected, because I've hated musicals ever since they made me watch Meet Me in St. Louis in film class. But
you were nervous to watch these. Yeah, I think you said you were saving them towards the end and you were not excited.
He was devastatingly charming. And how do you, what's the name of this author or the director, Lubitsch?
Ernst Lubitsch, yep.
I feel like he's very sophisticated. I read that bit about Chevalier's mother, but I also read Lubitsch is going through a divorce at this time, and people suggest that maybe some of the cynicism that he felt from his marriage failing seeped in. But I don't think it does it to the point where you can't enjoy it. This might be somewhat problematic as it relates to women, but I felt like the women had real agency when they got together and started sharing their affection for him and kind of giving each other tips. There's actually, I saw quoted, I think Billy Wilder, this is from Wikipedia, but I think I also read it maybe in a Criterion website, said that the Lubitsch touch is a visual comment or joke that becomes a trademark signature of his films. It's the elegant use of the super joke. You had a joke, you felt satisfied, and there was one more big joke on top of it, the joke you didn't expect. And in this one, I guess Wilder assumes that the wrong girl gets the man. And I'm just curious what you think about that. Is that true? Did the wrong girl get the man? If this was set today, would they be in a throuple?
I feel like in all of the movies, the Ernst Lubitsch movies that I've seen with Maurice Chevalier in it, he plays a character who falls in love very easily. Mm-hmm. And, you know, there's that party that's like, he should end up with Franzi. He loves this girl. But even the way he met her was under that guy at the beginning asking him to be his wingman. You never ask Maurice Chevalier to be your wingman. I saw right away. I'm like, this is a bad call. Bad call right off the bat. But I feel like, the traditional Hollywood romance would be he gets back with her at the end. You know, the marriage gets ended. You know, they made a point that they never slept together. So it's not a bad thing. But then the movie ends with him just basically, oh, my wife is suddenly really hot. Oh, boy, I forget about Franzi.
Basically, my mistress taught my wife how to be hot.
Yeah. And that scene alone, to me, that scene, which is funny because he's not in it, makes this movie like perfect. Like those two, the chemistry together in that scene, that is like, there's total pre-code in that. You have two women together undressing.
It's very intimate. They're on a bed together. They're kind of sharing stories of the man they're both attracted to, and not in a combative way. It becomes a supportive way. And I think this whole movie is very tongue-in-cheek, and I think realizing that helped me appreciate it. And I think one way that I realized that was, I don't know if you remember, it's at the beginning, it might be a telegraph or an instruction, where there's a quote and it's attributed to Shakespeare. He who does not pay his tailor in summer shall freeze in winter. Oh, yeah. And every time I see a quote attributed to Shakespeare, I go hunt it down, because 9 times out of 10, somebody's misattributed it. There's no evidence that Shakespeare actually wrote this, but I think with Lubitsch, he did that on purpose. And I wonder how much of this touch of his, how much of the joke is not just within the film for the audience, but for him as the director playing a joke on the audience. You know, you might be expecting one thing coming into this, but really there's a lot of layers that maybe do comment on the limitations of marriage, that monogamy might be part of that politics of responsibility, this kind of impossible restriction to place upon somebody, especially after the next one we see in this year by him. Yeah,
there's so many forward things in this movie like that make stand out from the pack, and it's with Lubitsch in general. But like the Maurice Chevalier breaking the fourth wall, like that wasn't new.
I loved that.
I loved it though. Yeah. I think a modern audience, you think of like The Office, right? You think of like Jim or whatever, like looking at the camera when something happens.
Or Ferris Bueller.
Crazy that 100 years before that, yeah, by the 100, 80, 90,
Yeah.
Maurice Chevalier was doing the same thing. He's like, talk to one person, then wink at the camera. And you're like, it's so great when he does it. Like it works. It just works so well.
That wink, I mean, it seems really light and superficial on the surface, but I think Franzi says something. Girls who start with breakfast don't usually stay for supper. So there's these, there's a lot of light jokes and winks and songs, but there's also characters speaking deep truth. Whether it's fair or not, whether he should have ended up with Franzi, the fact that she was willing to sort of engage at a level beyond the princess might have doomed her from the start.
That actress I just thought was really great, from Miriam Hopkins. Like once she does the remakeover and he walks in on her and she's like playing the piano frantically and she's smoking a cigarette, I'm like, oh my God, like this girl's great, and considering she was just playing this country bumpkin like a few scenes earlier, like she did both parts great.
I mean, that's very jazz age too, right? Women finally realizing that they can be a little bit more expressive and independent sexually, but also just in terms of fashion and music and interests, they can explore without being damned as, whores or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, and that's basically the ultimate look at that time. Like I've talked in Hitchcock episodes on like history of women and smoking in public. And like, so smoking in public was like a sign of empowerment for women. Cutting your hair short, kind of having a short haircut, was another empowering thing. And she's dressed kind of like a flapper, which is another empowering thing. So like her whole character is just like, yeah, nope, you know what? I'm in charge. I'm wearing the pants in this relationship now. And Maurice Chevalier is just totally cool. I'm in. Yeah, I liked this movie quite a bit. I think my only reservation with this movie is the music was better in the other movie.
Mm-hmm.
The lingerie song is great. The lingerie song is really good. But the Rat-a-tat-tat band song that comes up a couple times was like kind of a little bit, it's just kind of cringy. I kind of felt bad for him having to sing that.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to criticize anything that he does. It's just the commentary on women. When you were talking, it reminded me of a story, I'd say, that was maybe 5 years before this, roughly, I don't know, by Fitzgerald, called Bernice Bobs Her Hair. And there's this question at this time of how do you actually assert independence? Is it just about fashion? Is it performance? Even having a job? I mean, Franzi, the fact that she's a violin player, right?
Yeah.
And there's some line in there, I think it's, do all girls like that play the violin? And somebody kind of barbs back, that's not the only thing they play or whatever. So just the fact of a woman working is still sort of suggested as being the other working girl, not like she's working the streets or whatever. Franzi's able to help, I think, empower to a certain extent the princess, because the princess wants him and just doesn't know how to express that. How to get that.
But I do think having confidence, though, is kind of what she's learned by the end, like, and feeling good in her own skin. And I think that's
she's not performing. This is what she wants to do.
Right. Tony, as we go through these movies, when we hit your bottom two on your list, like the least, let me know. For people at home, this is going to be a long episode. We get 9 movies we're talking about. So we're going to try and do an abbreviated on your 2 worst. All right. And I want to see if they match up with my 2 worst.
Okay.
This wasn't one, was it?
Oh, absolutely not. It's you don't want me to tell you yet? I think the next.
No, tell me when we hit it. Tell me when we get to Bad Girl by Frank Borzage. I watched this movie on Apple TV for $2.99. How did you watch this movie, Tony?
I think I might have rented it from Amazon Prime, but I think it's also free on YouTube. Some of them I did rewatch that way. So.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that. I didn't even check, honestly, on that. So free options again. This movie was 90 minutes. It starred Sally Ellers as Dorothy Haley, James Dunn as Eddie Collins, Mina Gambel as Edna Driggs. It was nominated for 3 Oscars. Writing 1, Edwin Burke. Directing 1, Frank Borzage. I think this is his second time winning Best Director. And it was nominated for Best Picture, which it did not win. Let me just jump right to the synopsis, and then we can talk about the movie. All right, this is clearly going to be my synopsis of this movie. This movie wanted to be The Crowd so bad. The Crowd won Best Picture on Golden Boy in episode 1 with Cyrus. Dorothy Haley and Edna Briggs are store models and best friends. On a night out, they meet irritating mansplainer Eddie, who treats them like garbage. Dorothy falls in love with him, and the two start dating. But one night, Eddie ignores Dorothy's request to get her home early, as her brother will punch her in the face for being late. Instead, Eddie whines until she stays, undermining every excuse she gives and stating that he was never rough with her. He then proceeds to get rough with her and causes her to stay out until 4 a.m. Only way to keep up appearances after that is to get married. So obviously they do. Eddie works hard because he was so poor when he was younger, and his hard work lets him buy a great house in the city. And his connections get him the best doctor in the country to assist his wife in giving birth to a healthy baby boy. The doctor even does the job for free, and he gives the kid $50. But trouble is in the air as Eddie and Dorothy have a misunderstanding. Both thinks the other doesn't want the baby. But then they talk about it off screen and it gets resolved. The end. What'd you think, Toni?
That's a pretty good synopsis. This is probably in my bottom too, and I feel like I should like it more than I do because, working class tenements. But if you're really thinking about, and everyone that I read contextualizes it in that way, but if you're looking at working class in the 30s, how the heck did he buy that house? I mean, I don't care how hard he works. I know he also does a boxing match, right? Isn't that the big thing? He gets beat up.
Yeah, he gets beat up in the boxing match, which was a thing because Chaplin was doing it in a lot of his shorts and movies.
Yeah, boxing is a huge thing. So I'm excited for when we get to the champ. But I feel like this started strong with some banter that I didn't expect. There was a line. What's the main character's name in here again? The woman?
Dorothy Haley.
Dorothy says, when men deliver bologna to my door, I like to give them a receipt. You know, there's some sass going on. But the fact that she is modeling a wedding gown, I think, is a huge thematic clue for me that this ends up being a kind of containment narrative, that whatever sort of progress and development we see from her kind of quickly gets shot down when she accepts the love of who you call mansplainer. Yeah. I don't know if Eddie's the one who gives this line. If you don't want a guy to salute you, you take down your flag. Be on time. I ain't waiting for any Dizzy Janes. Wow. You know, a little bit of this sarcastic back talk could be seen as romantic, maybe, but she just falls for it hook, line, and sinker so quickly that I feel like her tough talk in the beginning is just bluster when she's nervous in the new position. I almost wonder the novel and the play that it was based on, which the Hays Code, you know, I heard this got bounced around a lot from studio to studio. Maybe some of the social commentary got lost in translation. But as you said, you know, any sort of tension between them gets largely resolved off stage. And for me, that would have been the interesting part. It would have been interesting to see how does a couple trying to find romance while struggling financially actually fare. But it's all so quickly resolved. You know, I go and get beat up, and then, of course, I can afford a doctor to the stars. No, that's not how real life works. Yeah.
I really encourage anyone listening to the show who didn't watch episode 1, or even if you did and didn't watch The Crowd, to watch The Crowd. Because I do feel like this movie, Frank Borzage saw that movie, and this happens all the time in Hollywood. Directors see a movie they really like, and then they try to do their version of it. And I really feel like he took whatever they gave him. And let me give you some of the backstory, because you brought it up, Toni, on the Hays Code, because that played a huge role in how this movie got kind of the flames tamped down on it. So again, more Wikipedia reading. The development of Bad Girl from novel to play required extensive purging and rewriting of the material to conform to the dictates of the Hays office. A November 16th, 1928 memo from the Hays office put a damper on the whole production, stating, Bad Girl might be produced as a sex hygiene picture called Motherhood. It is simply the story of a girl who is bad for one night, marries the boy the next day, and then has a baby. The memo described the novel as a nauseating story of doctors, illnesses, etc., and as cheap and shoddy writing about cheap and shoddy people. The Hays office advised numerous producers not to attempt it because it was too censorable. All that remains of the provocative content of the novel is the title, Bad Girl, and I would also argue the poster, which is very provocative, right. And you are not getting what the poster shows you in the movie, that's for sure. I didn't think this movie was very like sexy at all in any way, which you totally get it because the cover has that paperback Harlequin kind of seed, pulp vibe where you're like, ooh, what am I going to watch tonight? Yeah, you're not happy with this. The only thing I would take away from this that I can't get out of my head that literally goes coming through since I watched the movie, it's Eddie's response to everything is okay. That's the way he loves someone, and he does that hand gesture like it's not a salute. And Jackie Cooper does it in The Champ too. He does it to the Champ when the Champ says something to him. He goes, "Okay." So I'm like, what is that? That I guess that's something in the 30s people were doing, and in this movie, they try to make it like The Princess Bride. It's his way of saying "I love you." Is okay. That's the only thing I liked about it. Actually, this is in my bottom two. This is actually two from the bottom. Not the worst. I'm with you on that.
Okay, good.
Okay. Seriously, I'm at work and someone will be like, Kenny, I need you to go do this. And I'm like, okay.
That guy was such a dick. I mean, I think he was a charming actor. I know it was his first role, but the writing, I didn't see any romance in there. Like Chevalier could pull anyone, but this guy, like, what's the attraction there? I don't get it. Maybe we needed more development on Dorothy first. I don't know. It's just not.
Edna. I liked her friend Edna as a character. Like, she had that kid who was just like a hellion. Like, it's like a weird side story of just this kid ripping the wallpaper off her walls. Like,
maybe that's why Dorothy has a hesitation about having children. Birth control right there.
She's like, this kid. He almost started a fire, or he's like cooking something in the kitchen.
Edna's only able to be so honest because she's a widow. It's like a badge of permission for women at that time. I don't hate it. I know that it was, during the time people loved it. And I think some of the reviews said, it's unpretentious and real. And I would say that's maybe just because at the time Hollywood was still a little starved for representations of working people. And even the idea of not being thrilled about a pregnancy might have seemed shocking at that time, which is still it's certainly true that the politics of respectability has some residue today in how we fashion motherhood as this saintly thing that everyone should automatically embrace and never be critical of. But this idea that her virtue is first in the hands of her brother and only saved by this jerk, marrying her, it's so much weaker to me than something like the last one, where at least we can see the woman pushing back against that maybe being a bad girl could actually be a good thing. And in this one, no, not at all. Being a bad girl is bad. You have to love having a kid and never question it. And she doesn't even get to work, right? Doesn't she try to work? And Eddie says, oh, no woman of mine.
Mine's going to work.
I'd rather get the crap beat out of me for money.
I mean, the only thing bad about her is really she speaks her mind, right? I mean, she'll tell you what she thinks. And I'd read that this actress was a real curse word laden jokester. Like, I think she comes from the Chaplin shorts or from somewhere like that. So she was known on the set for being, smart mouthed. So maybe that's an inside joke that they call it Bad Girl, because she wasn't bad in the movie.
No, I mean, I also heard some other YouTuber was doing a review just of this film and was talking about how Borzage also did the film adaptation of Farewell to Arms, and Ernest Hemingway did not like it one bit and said it was over sentimentalized. So maybe because of the pressure of the Hays Code, he learned his lesson that you kind of need to crystallize and reduce any social commentary to make it palatable, for producers and audiences.
Yeah, I don't want to insult our fans out there who like Frank Borzage, but I've seen him in, he also did Seventh Heaven, which is at another Oscars. And this guy to me seems like a studio, the guy you go to when you want to get the movie made cheap and get it done on time. This isn't an artist. This is a guy who's just okay, we're going to make Bad Girl. We put money into it, get Frank on it, and then he'll just do his kind of mediocre work.
There were some interesting scenes. There were some, I think it was a dissolve of the two characters, Eddie and Dorothy, and the carnival, Coney Island. And so some of that was exciting to me because I thought, oh, this is going to be carnival-esque. This is going to push boundaries. And I feel like that's all really set up in the beginning, but maybe the end is just too rushed or maybe it's too restricted by the Hays Code because it doesn't get realized. So I mean, it's a tough thing, I imagine, to be a director at this time, to try to navigate both what will get put on the screen and what your original text that you're working with wants to do.
I also think that's him ripping off King Vito, the crowd, because they meet and have romance at like a carnival like that again too. So it's just, there's too many similarities to be like, yeah, dude, you're not, although he wins best director. So, I mean, obviously I heard he was also friendly with everybody and he went out for drinks with all the producers and stuff. So, thinking about it, I'm thinking the main thing in the book was they hook up that night, which should have happened in the movie. In the movie, they're like, "Oh, we didn't sleep together," but my brother will think so. But they should have hooked up. She should have gotten pregnant, and then that makes the okay. She didn't want to stay. She was a bad girl. She got pregnant with the guy, and now they're getting married. The movie, like, I think that's where the Hays Code was like, that can't happen.
I mean, but you can only put so much on the code because you think, okay, he had a lot of issues because of the code, but then how did something like Shanghai Express get made? I mean, that movie.
Because you have a director that's willing to say, screw the code.
Right.
There are directors that were just like Ernst Lubitsch is like, I'm sure the Hays Code's calling and he's just like, yeah, no, go away. Frank Brazage is taking every call. He's just like, oh, the Hays office again. Yep. Okay, I'll cut it. I think.
Yeah, he's a team player, I guess,
Good for him. I don't think he deserved Best Director, although that's not what this show is about. 5-star final. Came out September 26, 1931, directed by Mervyn Leroy. I saw this on Amazon, also $2.99. Toni, you got a free copy of this somehow?
No, I did rent it, and it was worth $2.99 for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, agree. So this was 89 minutes. It starred Marion Marsh as Jenny Townsend and actor Edward G. Robinson as Joseph W. Randall. People our age growing up will remember him being caricatured in, was it Bugs Bunny cartoons? Like when they would show old Hollywood people. I definitely recognized his face from that. Joseph W. Randall is the managing editor of the New York Evening Gazette, and he wants to legitimize the paper by reducing sensationalism and improving reporting. But that don't sell no papers. So owner Bernard Hincliffe instructs him to publish a serial looking back on a 20-year-old murder, and he reluctantly agrees. 20 years ago, Nancy Voorhees murdered her boss after he knocked her up and refused to marry her, and she was acquitted by a sympathetic jury. In the present day, her 20-year-old daughter, Jenny, believes her stepfather, Michael Townsend, is her actual father and knows nothing of the murder. Jenny is about to marry Philip Weeks, son of wealthy parents. The newspaper story has the potential to completely upend and destroy all of their lives. Using many dirty tricks, the newspaper gets the story, publishes it, and causes Nancy to commit suicide with poison. Her husband, Michael, immediately follows suit, leaving Jenny alone with Phillips, his own parents disinheriting him after learning the news. Jenny visits the paper, looking to murder the owner, instead accusing all of them of murdering her parents. Philip arrives and delivers a chilling speech about the media that still rings true today. You've grown rich on filth, and no one's ever dared rise up and crush you out. Randall resigns, followed by his secretary that has always loved him, by the way, presumably to work at a more noble newspaper. The end. What'd you think?
Well, I loved it. I mean, I thought did you notice that the last name Voorhees, it made me think of, what is it, Friday the 13th is Voorhees, Jason Voorhees?
That's got to be it, right? That's got to be.
I thought it was, so I hunted it down, and he says it's not. I guess it was just a more common name, but it's hard not to think of a killer woman Voorhees and not think
a killer mother named Voorhees.
Right, exactly. That motherhood thing, it actually tracks me back to Bad Girl. One of the things I thought most progressive about Bad Girl, which might have been more present in the novel and the Hays Code, or at least the pressure of the upcoming Hays Code tamped it down, was this idea of the possibility of abortion, because even though abortion's not legal at this moment, we know women are still having them. Premarital sex or premarital pregnancy, God forbid, as being something that could damn your entire life seemed to me an interesting subject for all of these films to explore. I thought the voice of reason or conscience was, is it his secretary? Do we have her name, the character's name? Miss Taylor.
Miss Taylor.
Yeah, Miss Taylor, I'd say, was definitely our voice of conscience. She has this one line, I think you can always interest people in the crucifixion of a woman, I mean, it was so damning and so beautiful. And the word choice there, crucifixion, kind of reminded me of the sort of Pontius Pilate imagery we get from Randall when he is washing his hands, after his secretary tells him basically what you're doing is trying to retry this woman publicly. He goes into the little washroom and the camera focuses in on him washing his hands for a really long time. Mm-hmm. You're supposed to think of him as this Pontius Pilate figure, like despite whatever sort of qualms he might have about the if it bleeds, it leads ethos of journalism, which still exists today, he's just a middleman. He's just gonna do what he needs to do to keep it successful because ideals won't put a patch on your pants, So if we didn't have that secretary, his conscience essentially pushing him, then I don't know if it would have turned out the way it did. I don't know if he would have ever left the newspaper, or had those questions or doubts about the kind of stories that get promoted. And media representation in general, I would say, is a huge thing that's happening with realism and modernism. I read this thing recently. It was sort of late 19th century where Mark Twain, it's called The Disgraceful Persecution of a Boy. And he's looking at someone who committed a hate crime against Asian Americans. And he laid the blame not just on the boy, but also on the police and on the system and on the media specifically. So I think we have a lot of writers, artists, directors questioning what role is the media playing in shaping, stereotypes and biases about the other, the capital O other, whether it's woman or some other kind of other.
The cynicism towards the media, the fact that it still rings true today just shows we have no handle on this problem, like how to deal with it, what should be getting reported. In the last Academy Awards, we watched a movie called The Front Page, which is also a very cynical take on the media and people just literally making up headlines to get the news. I think this is a better movie, 5-star final for sure. There's the things I don't really like about it. The characters don't really feel super well drawn, especially the family, the Voorhees family. Feels like we're just getting their shocking story, which maybe that works for the movie. I thought this was a powerful movie, and definitely that speech at the end really rang true with today. It's not a movie I would recommend, though.
I mean, I feel like if you're going to recommend to somebody a film about a critique of media, I would go to the Film Network before I would go to this. The one where they're all outside the window. I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. But I imagine the same sort of tension that a newspaper editor feels about what he wants to communicate and what he's encouraged to communicate, like what the truth is versus what will sell papers, is the same kind of tension the directors are feeling at this time with the code looming over their head. For its time, I would say it's progressive and interesting. It is a little heavy-handed. The family, the Voorhees family, are definitely just devices and types. The most interesting character to me is definitely the secretary, Miss Taylor. At one point, she says, "I'm not paid for opinions. Take me to a speakeasy if you want to hear it." So I thought, speaking of the Jazz Age, Prohibition, it was an interesting line, but it's also an interesting line when you're thinking about worker discontent at this time, because she's really trying to draw a clear line and boundary between how much is expected of the working girl. We see when we get to the Grand Hotel, what's expected can often be incredibly inappropriate and will end up damning them. But in this case, not only is she rejecting the advances, she's rejecting the sort of emotional labor of trying to educate this dude who clearly doesn't want to be educated because he initially, at least, just wants to sell papers. I mean, it takes the death of a woman, even though his secretary has already warned him that this is a crucifixion.
Yeah, I kind of felt like when he didn't really want to take the phone call, like that might have been a point where the movie could have done him a little better, like showing him more anguished about talking to the woman. All of a sudden at the end, it's almost like he wants to be the good guy. Like, oh yeah, we did it. We killed him. You're like, yeah, right. You did. You shouldn't be bragging about it, man. The other thing with this movie that confused me was the title, like, cause I'm reading the Wikipedia page afterwards and I just assumed 5-star final maybe was the name of the newspaper.
Yeah.
But I got this. The title reference is to the practice of newspapers publishing a series of editions throughout the day, with their final edition front page having 5 stars printed and the word final. 5-star final is also a font they used after World War I, favored by newspapers. So you would get 5 newspapers in a day? Is that what I read
I
correctly?
didn't have Twitter back then, so
So you would just that just seems interesting to me that you're like, did you read the 3rd paper today? The 3-star? No, I'm waiting for the 5. It's got all the good news.
I mean, I guess if you think about it, that's why maybe they have to have so many sensational stories, is because it's even like the algorithms for social media right now, right? Where negative engagement is promoted because negative engagement will get more eyes on the page. You're pressured to put out 5 newspapers a day, then by the end of the day, you're going to be promoting the most salacious, trashy stories, appealing to the most base instincts in readers who want to engage in some kind of cheap schadenfreude that they didn't make the same mistakes the Voorhees woman did. I liked them better than I expected, and I was really surprised by how many of the themes not only resonate with the literature class I'm teaching, but just even our world today. Like,
yeah,
all of 5-Star Final's flaws, we are still dealing with this shit about media promoting salacious stories without any sort of conscience, you know?
all right. I'm ready to move to the next one. All right, here we go. The Champ. This was came out November 9th, 1931, directed by King Vidor, who I love from The Crowd. I don't know if I mentioned that already tonight. It was available on Amazon, $2.99, like most of these. Tony, did you get a free one, or did you pay for
I
this?
probably could have, but this was worth the money.
Worth the money. Okay. All right. 87 minutes. It starred Irene Rich as Linda Purcell, Wallace Beery as Andy the Champ Purcell, Jackie Cooper as Dink Purcell, and I also wanted to throw in Jesse Scott as Jonah, who is Jackie Cooper's little buddy in this movie. There's not a ton of minority representation in any of these movies going forward so far, so I want to try to, when there is, and when it's not totally done in a racist way, highlight it, because I did think Jackie and Jesse, the 2 kids, were really great together in this movie. It was nominated 4 times, nominated for writing by Francis Marion, and it won. It was nominated for actor, Wallace Beery, and he won. It was director, King Vidor was nominated, did not win. And Best Picture, it did not win Best Picture. Andy the Champ Purcell is the former world heavyweight champion, now down on his luck and living in squalid conditions with his 8-year-old son, Dink, in Tijuana, Mexico. Champ is now a drunk and a gambler, despite his son's attempts at getting him to clean up his act. Champ wins Dink a horse, but promptly loses it a few days later. Dink names the horse Little Champ, and while entering him into a race, inadvertently meets Linda, a woman who will turn out to be his mother. She is now married to Tony, a wealthy man who owns one of the other horses in the race. Champ accepts payment from Linda for her to see Dink occasionally, but Dink has no emotional connection with her and prefers to live in a small apartment with Champ. After hitting rock bottom and almost giving Dink away to Linda for good, the Champ enters a boxing match against the Mexican heavyweight champion. He trains hard for the fight, and for the first time really does stay away from drinking and gambling. Champ is determined to win the fight, make Dink proud of him, and use the prize money to buy back Little Champ. Tony and Linda attend the fight to support Champ and Dink. They have given up trying to take him away. The match is brutal, and Champ is seriously injured. Dink and the others in his corner urge him to throw in the towel, but Champ refuses to allow that. He musters a last burst of energy and knocks out his opponent. After the fight, he triumphantly presents Little Champ to Dink, but after witnessing his son's overjoyed reaction, Champ collapses. Champ is brought into his dressing room where a doctor determines that his injuries are mortal. Champ urges Dink to cheer up, and then dies, leaving Dink inconsolable. Despite the best efforts of all the men and the boys in the room, who one by one attempt to calm him, Dink wails, "I want the champ." Finally, Dink spots Linda enter the room. He looks at her, cries out, "Mother," and runs into her arms. The champ is dead, Mama. The end. I think you liked this one, Tony. That's the vibe I'm getting.
Yes. I thought Jackie Cooper, is it? He's a fantastic delight. I was a little disappointed that Lance didn't love him in the last thing that you guys had, the last Golden Boy.
Yeah, can I offer a correction on this right now? Because I too mocked Jackie Cooper for his performance in Skippy. I could see him winning for his performance in The Champ. Jackie,
yes.
He was fantastic in this movie. I take back every negative thing I said about a child being nominated for an Academy Awards. I still think he was not good in Skippy, but he was fantastic in The Champ. All right, continue. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, the pathos between these two just broke my heart. I did not expect to enjoy a boxing movie. quite this much. And I wanted to know if I could talk a little bit about the boxing narrative.
Please.
So there's a book by Chris Viles. He's a professor at the University of Connecticut. Realism for the Masses, Aesthetics, Popular Front Pluralism in U.S. Culture from 1935 to 1947. Even though this is a little bit before that time period, the champ does get mentioned. Some of the threads about the depression and about work and the brutality of work and entertainment on the body are relevant. So there's a section in here on the Popular Front boxing narrative, basically the Popular Front being this moment where people start at least somewhat flirting with communism, which I think you probably talked about a little bit when you got to Chaplin, when you've covered Chaplin in your Golden Boys. So a dirty business, boxers on the big screen. In most boxing films of the mid-20th century, a number of consistent genre features emerge. The narrative almost always centers upon a working class man, usually white and often ethnically marked, for whom boxing is a means of social mobility. We absolutely see this when we look at Andy versus Linda, the mother versus the father. Mm-hmm. Boxing is generally a seedy and exploitative world of gangsters, greedy promoters, and fast living that threatens the integrity, innocence, and health of the boxer protagonist. Now, Viles mentions in here, our champ begins the narrative already corrupted. And while this is true, I think you are supposed to be led to believe that he's essentially a good person. Andy and Beery, acting through Andy, is excellent at showing us how some of our worst natures or our worst vices, like alcoholism, might also have causes in the larger, social construction. The recurrence of fixed fights and double crosses in this exploitative world ensure the fight game is rarely a meritocracy. So this idea of meritocracy, challenging the American dream, showing that the people who are struggling and poor right now, which many of them might be in the audience, it's not through their own failing. If the protagonist achieves redemption, it is either because he has left the sport behind or learned to use it for something more than riches or self-aggrandizement. It could be securing the well-being of family members, even though the protagonist often wins the fight, which we get at the end. The whole world of boxing is generally questioned through victory. Either he makes it clear that it was his last fight and says goodbye to the corrupt milieu, or some tragedy or pang of guilt denies the viewer an unambiguous happy ending. So, this is blending realism and melodrama, as Viles says, but it's really acting as a class commentary, as a class critique in many ways, in my opinion. And I just loved it. I loved the relationship between the two of them. And I loved how Beery, who I had first seen in the Grand Hotel, surprised me that he was able to represent such a fully developed character, someone who, despite his awful parenting in many ways, I was able to feel such deep sympathy for. This was probably the only movie that we watched that brought me close to tears.
Oh, I agree with you, though. This movie definitely, well, King Vidor, first of all, as a director, I'm seeing him. He's a guy I'm liking from this early period, and I think slice of life, kind of real people, is something he's clearly excelling at right now, or he's definitely focused on it. And one of the things you mentioned while you were talking that kind of got my brain going was the alcohol, like the treatment of alcohol. We are at the end of Prohibition. Like, Prohibition is either going to be repealed at this Oscars or by the next one.
I think it was 33, despite FDR being really into temperance.
Yeah, so it's about to end. But all of these movies, I was thinking, that we've discussed so far have dealt with alcohol in a certain way. In this movie, we see its negative effects on Wallace Beery's character. In Five Star Final, we see all the newsmen going to the salon, like almost like it's their way to relax. It's like their highlight of their day. It's like getting away to go get a drink. Bad Girl, it's funny that the movie called Bad Girl is the one where they're not drinking in excess. Like, they're like, no, this guy does not party like the other guys. And Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the guy drinks a potion, gets drunk, and beats his wife up. I mean, so we're dealing with, it's like Hollywood is not sure exactly how to present alcohol. Like, everyone wants to drink, but at the same time, all these stories kind of have in the background alcohol as like this antagonist, really. And in The Champ makes Wallace Beery this really fascinating character. You're rooting for him, but he's not really making the best choices. And, like we see him gambling and he's winning and you're like, stop, stop, stop. And then immediately, loses everything. I think this movie depends on that chemistry between Jackie Cooper and Wallace Beery. And if those two aren't in sync, which is funny because behind the scenes I'd heard it was not in sync, but on screen it's great. I heard behind the scenes Wallace Beery did not like working with children actors. Jackie Cooper did not like working with him, although they did work together again on another movie. It's tough because I don't want to repeat stuff. Like I kind of talked some trash about Wallace Beery in the last one, so I don't really want to get into all that stuff again.
Really? What's wrong with Wallace Beery? Break my heart, why don't you?
No. Well, he becomes the highest paid actor in Hollywood after this movie. And there was something about young Ray Bradbury asked him for his autograph when he was a kid, and Wallace Beery spit on him.
Oh my God. He hates children.
Yeah, he was known as like a son of a bitch, kind of, but to other actors. He loved stepping on other actors' lines and kind of making them mess up and like making them lose their close up, So if the camera would go on the person he's acting with close up, he would do something so that it would be messed up and it couldn't be used, kind of keep himself center frame. Hold on. All right, here's one bit I'll read on this. Child actors in particular recalled unpleasant encounters with Beery. Jackie Cooper, who made several films with him early in his career, called him a big disappointment. I like to picture Jackie Cooper saying that at this age, not later. She's a big disappointment. Cooper accused Beery of upstaging and other attempts to undermine his performances out of what Cooper presumed was jealousy. He recalled impulsively throwing his arms around Beery after one especially heartfelt scene, only to be gruffly pushed away. So he's got some, off-screen problems. But, Jackie Cooper mentions the thing about him pushing him away. And I'm trying to think in this movie a scene like that. And I almost feel like that would work, though. He's so sort of unpredictable. He wants to be his father, but at the same time, he's willing to give up being his father and to get some money, presumably to gamble and drink. So I think he's a complicated character, and I think that works. So whatever tension they had off screen helped, I think, when they were filming this together. I can't say enough about Jackie Cooper. He really surprised me and carried the scenes he was in this movie.
This is constructed, at least in the book that I read from, as realist. But I also feel like there's something maybe modernist, and maybe King Vidor is bringing this to the table in the role reversals that are going on here. We've got a gendered role reversal in terms of, we often think about the mother being the primary caregiver, but in this case, it's the father. But the child is really taking care of the parent. He's coming home drunk and the child's undressing him. But we see that moment of Andy's conscience when, the child goes to do this again, and he finally says, no, I don't want you to be taking care of me. So he is kind of pushing him away in terms of the character, because he realizes it's like a representation of his failing, that his child is the only thing that's saving him from a life of utter depravity. There's one more part that I want to look at about this boxing narrative, just because I think it's such a good metaphor, especially when you think of all the other fights that are going on at the time. Or I don't know if you've ever seen Cinderella Man, which is set during this time period. It's incredibly saccharine. It's Russell Crowe basically playing this guy who's a boxer that we're supposed to feel bad for. Even in Bad Girl, we've got Eddie going to boxing. Boxing is kind of like the last resort for a man who can't get any other kind of status. I guess Gerald Early, the scholar, who says boxing is often a metaphor for the individual in mass society, because society is kind of beating you down. It exploits your dreams of the good life. If you play by its rules, you could end up disfigured, dead, or spiritually voided. So it's almost like this ultimate expression of how the entertainment system can chew you up and spit you out. And I think the interesting thing with both Beery and Cooper's narratives are that we see them as two actors who've resisted this, which is especially impressive for Cooper, because we know child actors so often end up becoming, washed up and used by the system. It's just a great metaphor for that. The horse race, I was so invested. I so wanted this charming duo to finally have the opportunity to break out of this cycle. He's damned and doomed, and I think alcoholism is a huge part of this. And I think that cultural moment of the prohibition is an opportunity for people to question why we drink, what drink is replacing, because they didn't have psych meds at the time, I suppose. And one of the interesting artistic choices I think that Vidor made was there was early in the film a very, the young kid Dink helping his dad undress after a drunk, but it's accompanied by this really upbeat music. And it kind of reminded me of like what I've heard scholars say T.S. Eliot does in The Wasteland, this bathos, which is very modernist, which is contrasting something dark and heavy with something that seems light and superficial. I don't think that upbeat music is there to make us ignore how sad and tragic the scene is. I think the upbeat music is there to heighten it, to show us the complexity. There's love between these two, despite the fact that this role reversal and this failure of the father to care for the child is deeply problematic, but it's what else could he do? How else could he help this boy? The only other alternative presented to him seems to be to sell him to his mother when he's cared for him all his life.
Yeah, and he's very willing to do so. It doesn't take a lot of thought, really.
That's better for him. He's willing to sacrifice his one true companion because he knows it's in his best interest,
You're drawing me back in. That scene where they're out to dinner, where he's like, I'll ask the kid. And he takes him out to dinner. But the way he phrases all of the questions is, you don't want to live in a fancy house, right? You don't want to dress up in fancy clothes and go to school, right? It's in a way, of course, Jackie Cooper's not going to say, well, actually,
Right.
And he also doesn't know any better anyway. He loves living with the champ.
Yeah. And I mean, that rejection of material wealth in favor of familial comfort is a really, I think, sharp commentary for the Depression. This idea that in order to survive, sort of solidarity is maybe just as important, if not more important, than the trappings of wealth, which do we ever even know why the mother didn't have him? I mean,
yeah, we never really got that story. I kind of when I first was like, is that his mother? Like, I kind of had that. How would you not know your kid if you're a woman and you gave birth? It's one thing for a dad to be like, oh, that's my kid. But you went through all this. You had him. And the movie doesn't really kind of give us how she ended up not with him. Apparently, maybe, I guess Wallace Beery at some point was doing better in life than she was when he was the champ. And maybe somehow that allowed him, although he's in Mexico, maybe he took the kid. I mean, who knows? Maybe the rules there are different.
I mean, I think also a lot of failed athletes in America find that leaving the country can give their career a little bit of a second infusion, because maybe whatever trials and tribulations he had in the US from his alcoholism, his career waning, would not be necessarily as well known in Mexico. I was also thinking, when we talk about speakeasies and alcohol, maybe rather than going to these underground spots, maybe having a place where you could openly engage in boozing every day was easier for him. But the routines that they built, the little network they have of the two sort of comic relief characters, it just shows that there's this long and rich history between the two of them that despite the flaws, despite the problems, there's real love there still.
It's sweet. It's a very sweet movie.
It is sweet.
You got anything else you want to add on that before we move on?
No, I just loved it.
From there, we go to Arrowsmith. Came out December 7th, 1931. Directed by John Ford. I did watch this one for free. It was on Tubi. I had to watch some commercials with it, but it was on the free app Tubi. How about you, Tony?
I think I made the mistake of paying $2.99 or whatever.
They got you. They got you on this one. Length, 108 minutes. Stars actress Helen Hayes as Leora Arrowsmith and actor Ronald Colman as Dr. Martin Arrowsmith. It was nominated 4 times for cinematography, for art direction, for Best Picture, and for writing, and it won none of them. And here's what it was about. From a young age, Dr. Martin Arrowsmith feels destined for a life of scientific discovery. But first, he must decide between a domestic future as a doctor married to Nurse Leora or one of medical discovery in New York with Dr. Max Gottlieb. Arrowsmith chooses country doctor in South Dakota, Once there, he comes up with an experimental cure for sick cows that works, but he explains that half must get the serum and half must not to see if it works, because that is how science works. The half that don't get it die. But then his wife can't have kids. So there goes that dream. And it's off to New York and discovering antibiotic serums with Dr. Max Gottlieb with his wife miserably in tow. Leora follows Arrowsmith all the way to the West Indies, where he plans to test his serum against bubonic plague on a small, poor, mostly black community. Half get the serum and half do not, just like the cows. His wife, meanwhile, gets bubonic plague when he foolishly leaves her to dispose of enough vials to kill an army because he is in too much of a rush to pack his bags and leave the house to worry about it. Depressed at his wife's senseless and needless death, he then gives all the poor people the serum and is a big-time hero, except to his mentor, because he took a big shit on science by not doing the half thing. But his mentor has gone senile, so who cares? Arrowsmith turns down a big promotion and a hottie that's crushing on him to be a medical rebel with his buddy Terry on a shoestring budget. The end. That about cover that movie?
Very good synopsis. Yeah.
That wasn't Wikipedia, believe it or not, guys.
Yeah. Yeah, the hottie part was the clue for me.
Yeah, this one's my worst. This one's the worst.
Me too, sadly.
Sadly, yeah. All right, do you want to get into this a little bit?
You know, the woman is pretty much just a disposable ball and chain that prevents Arrowsmith from his noble pursuit of true science. I just found that to be really troubling and tiresome. It's confusing why we even have that character.
Yeah.
So I did a little bit of a deep dive into Sinclair Lewis to try to find out if maybe the adaptation just wasn't as good as the book. But I found that Kreif, who is the scientist, he worked with him on writing this, he had a really deep disdain for mainstream America. Apparently, Sinclair Lewis was a big drunk himself. I think he would stop drinking in long enough to write. He says, its buildings are measured by the mile. It hires hundreds of young doctors of philosophy to give rapid instruction in Sanskrit, navigation, accountancy, spectacle fitting, sanitary engineering, yada, yada, yada. It is not a snobbish rich man's college devoted to leisurely nonsense. It is the property of the people of the state and what they want. It is a mill to turn out men and women who will lead moral lives, play bridge, drive good cars, be enterprising in business, and occasionally mention books, though they're not expected to have time to read them. It is a Ford Motor Factory, and its products rattle a little. They are beautifully standardized with perfectly interchangeable parts. So I feel like Lewis is using science here personally as a sort of metaphor for art and literature. And he has this deep disdain for what he considers middle-class art and middle-class expectations. And I think he writes that disdain into Arrowsmith's attitudes about science that leave no room for love or women or anything like that.
While you mentioned the novel thing, just a couple of different things that were different that they omitted for the movie. Apparently, in the novel, Arrowsmith was a serial womanizer. The movie completely skips all mention of Arrowsmith's wealthy, self-centered second wife. Myrna Loy only has a few scenes with Coleman, and their relationship is underdeveloped to the point of being indecipherable in the movie. And I also got this from Wikipedia that Helen Hayes, the actress, claims it's because John Ford, the director, was constantly drunk while they were making this movie. And to speed up filming, he ended up cutting a lot of those scenes, like the scenes with the wife in it. So like, yeah, midway through the movie, she is just being towed along by him, and that's it. And her death is so comical. It's ridiculous. I just felt like this was like plot points. We're just following these stories on a chart of Dr. Arrowsmith's life. They're not particularly interesting. It's so comical to me, that intro. You remember the movie starts with a scene of his grandmother as a young child on like a carriage into the prairie. And she's like, we're going off, like we're striving off on our own, like to show that in his blood is he's the type that's going to strive off and make discoveries on his own, which is what he does.
He's got the pioneer spirit, I guess. The
pioneer spirit in science. You know, yeah, I'm not cheering for him at any point in this movie. And this actor did nothing for me. I'm not going to lie to you. This actor kind of very forgettable. I'm trying to think of something I liked about this movie, and I can't. Like, and it's not that I hated this movie. This movie is better than some of the movies I've watched at previous Oscars, definitely the one I did with Rob in episode 2. This would have won Golden Boy.
I mean, I liked some of the kind of Art Deco set design. I thought that was really pretty. I think the only lines that I liked was, I don't know if it was Arrowsmith or somebody else was saying, give me anger against all pretense. God, keep me looking for my own mistakes. God, give me the strength not to leave it to God. So I do like this idea of like early 20th century, post World War I, questioning a blind devotion to God, trying to challenge pretension. I like what it starts out trying to do. There's a funny line, I think, from the German, I have written down here, German science guy dying. Wish I could just have one last good drunk stumbling home in the snow. The jokes God plays. I mean, I found that to be attractive and comical, but I would have to agree with you. The actor didn't deliver it for me. Maybe the writer, maybe the director's failings make sense. But I also feel like Sinclair Lewis is mad at the time that he's writing this because he didn't get the, he feels like he deserved the Pulitzer Prize for Main Street, his bigger hit, and he didn't get it. And I feel like he's pissed off, and a lot of that bitterness is fueled in here to the point where it kind of outweighs the importance of developing character and developing plot and making us actually care about a pure science guy, which I think you could. I think you could write about somebody who is willing to sacrifice romance for science and make them sympathetic. If you can make the drunk, neglectful father in Champ sympathetic, there's no reason why you couldn't make Arrowsmith sympathetic, but it just doesn't get carried off. And that could be a failing of the writer, director, actor, or maybe a combination of all three.
I think it was a combination of all three. This is the only movie I actually was able to take real notes on. I do Letterbox, and ever since starting this, I don't want to put the movie reviews on there. A, because I don't want you to be spoiled by what I'm going to like. But B, that's basically it, A and B. But
I saw this before you, and I already was like, ugh.
Yeah. No, yeah, you saw this first, and you were immediately like, oh, that's a bad one.
It didn't set me up for the delights that were to come.
I don't have the exact, I thought I wrote it down. I don't have the exact thing. The one thing I do, there is something I like in this movie. There is a scene where when he's a small town doctor, he's helping, hanging out with the local kids in the neighborhood. And one of the kids is one of the little rascals, and he's my favorite little rascal. Don't worry, Kenny. Kenny from the editing booth has got you covered. You're thinking of Kendall Frederick McComas, also known as Breezy Brisbane, star of 1932's Readin' and Writin'. But one of my favorite Our Gang Little Rascals episodes, it's a line that stays in my head all the time, is delivered by this kid, where he's bunking school and he's hanging out with this blacksmith. And the blacksmith's like, you should go to school. He's like, when I was a kid and I went to school, I went every day and I wanted to be the president. And the kid looks at him and he goes, and all you turned out to be was a punk blacksmith. I loved that. That's what I liked in this movie. The cameo from the Little Rascals.
That's something. I liked the Art Deco set. That's it. It's not nothing.
I don't even remember them, to be honest.
That was like, I think when he went to New York, you saw some cool buildings. In New York in the snow is attractive. Yeah. And I could picture having a good one last drunk stumbling home in the snow in New York. So I did see there's some life in it.
What do you think about, what's that bit with the other girl at the end when he's in the colony and all of a sudden this woman is throwing herself at him? Like, that was so ridiculous. Like, just, Dr. House, she followed him to New York and he's like, no.
They were trying to do a Chevalier, but it didn't work because he's no Chevalier.
He is not. That little mustache. All right.
Oh my gosh, Marlene Dietrich, she's such a smoke show.
Oh my God, is she? Is she ever? Shanghai Express, February 12th, 1932, directed by Joseph von Sternberg. I watched this on a Criterion collection, the Joseph von Sternberg collection, which I want to watch the rest of these movies too. He did a lot of movies with Marlene Dietrich. How did you watch this movie, Tony? Oh, you already told us earlier. You got it from the library in Criterion. Yep. That is it. People at home, that is the way to go. The length of this movie, 80 minutes, starring Marlene Dietrich as Shanghai Lily / Madeline, Clive Brooke as Captain Donald Doc Harvey, actress Anna May Wong as Hui Fei, and actor Warner Oland as Henry Chang. I've added him in here because I feel like we might be talking about him a little bit. This movie was nominated 3 times, 1 for director, Joseph von Sternberg, 1 for Best Picture, and 1 for cinematography, Lee Garms, who won. And I will also add to that Marlene Dietrich did say, although Lee Garms won for cinematography, Joseph von Sternberg was primarily the guy behind the camera filming this movie. The movie looks the way it does because of him. Shanghai Express follows a handful of first-class passengers as they travel on an express train from Peking to Shanghai through a civil war embroiled China. On the train is Shanghai Lily, or Madeline, depending on the company, played by Marlene Dietrich. She is described as a coaster, a fancy word for a prostitute who lives by her wits along the China coast. But she used to be engaged to another passenger, British Captain Donald Harvey, or Doc, depending on the company. He is traveling the train to perform surgery in Shanghai and still carries a watch with Madeline's photo in it, a sign of his continued love. Other passengers include Hui Fei, a Chinese coaster sharing a room with Madeline, Christian missionary Mr. Carmichael, gambler Sam Salt, opium dealer Eric Baum, boarding house keeper Miss Haggerty, French officer Major Leonard, and Henry Chang, an actor in yellowface playing a Chinese warlord. Ultimately, Henry Chang takes the train hostage and seeks to ransom off the most important passenger, who turns out to be Captain Donald Harvey. Chang assaults Madeline while attempting to convince her to travel with him as his concubine, leading to Captain Harvey to break through a door and slug Chang. Chang instead assaults Hui Fei, raping her in his quarters, presumably. Captain Harvey is tied up and successfully ransomed off in return for another warlord. Chang tells Madeline he plans to blind Captain Harvey for attacking him, but she trades herself to him in exchange for Harvey being released uninjured. Harvey is not aware of these conditions and furiously plans to leave Madeline with Chang, believing she will sell herself to any man. Hui Fei sneaks into Chang's bedroom and stabs him to death, however, and all passengers are able to get back on the train and depart before the news spreads. Back on the train, Madeline tells the Reverend Carmichael the truth about her supposed betrayal, and he keeps her secret while defending her to Captain Harvey. She trusts that Harvey must know that she is a good person on his own. In Shanghai, everyone departs. Hui Fei is treated as a hero to a hero's welcome for killing the warlord, and Captain Harvey has a final chance to make up his mind about what kind of woman Madeline is, and he chooses correctly, ignoring his rank and position to kiss her passionately in the middle of a bustling train station. What'd you think?
I loved it, and I didn't expect to love it. With a title like Shanghai Express, I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is gonna be so deeply problematic. And I think it did have some problematic moments, but the 2 lead actresses,
Anime as Hui Fei and Marlene Dietrich,
they carried it. I mean,
yes.
They were able to take these really tight characters of the prostitute woman and just make them so rich and deeply sympathetic, and their bond across cultures, even as these marked women. I think it just shone from the screen how much depth they could put into what could be otherwise fairly limiting roles.
I totally agree. I think this movie, to me, visually was just stunning. Like, it just looked like a modern movie. Like, there were elements, like Wes Anderson style elements, like when they're filming the train and you've got the windows and they're all kind of like almost like a bento box you're looking at, and you get an actor in this one, you get an actor down here directing your attention. Like, it's filmed beautifully. The use of chiaroscuro lighting, I learned from Rob Albanese in episode 2, is the use of light and darkness, especially with when you have a beautiful subject like Marlene Dietrich. There are so many scenes on this train that just are mind-blowing. Like, they're so good. Like her in the light, her smoking looks so sexy in this movie. I wanted to go buy a pack of cigarettes, and I haven't smoked in a long time. It was so cool looking, and almost every shot in this movie was really good. And as I learned from commentary by the woman after the movie on the Criterion thing, the term extra diagenic. I watched that documentary and I'm hearing her talk, and my first thing is like, the heck did you just say? I don't know any of these words. So I'm like Googling, what is extra diagenic? I'm like, okay, it's when you add in like a shot of a guy banging a gong. It has nothing to do with the plot of the movie or the story, but it's meant to, we're in China, it's this extra element. There was so much I liked, and it was so conflicting to me because all these other movies we've talked about where they have these kind of racist caricatures of characters, starting with a jazz singer in the first one, up to Traderhorn in the last one. I'm like, so conflicted on how I feel about this. Werner Oland playing who I believe was Swedish, the actor playing it. You know, the movie says he's half white, half Chinese. That woman who what was her name who did the commentary?
Home King, she wrote Lost in Translation, Orientalism, Cinema, and the Enigmatic Signifier. I mean, she did use a lot of big words, but her explanations were so accessible. I found it to be the perfect balance of what academia should be, which is showing how deep these things that we might just read on the surface as entertainment can be, and how even something as problematic as this shows elements that are like surprisingly complex or progressive, you know?
Yeah, for the time, having Anna May Wong, and this is what one of the things she had pointed out, having this character with this arc where she uses this assault and takes charge of it herself, and she's not arrested at the end of the movie or like treated as a criminal. She's a hero. Like she shows up and there's news cameras that are willing to talk to her. I thought, you know, it was just such a fascinating character that I have not seen in any of these other movies we've really been doing. It's weird to like look at a movie like this and be like, okay, on one hand we get this Werner Oland problem. On the other hand, we've Anna May Wong, and they have a lot of Chinese actors in this scene. But then to look at all these other Hollywood movies that have no minorities in them. So it's like they get a pass almost by just skating the whole topic, right? They're just like Grand Hotel, we just got an all white cast, and you know, liminal spaces, another term that I've picked up from you and from King mentioned it too. This movie and Grand Hotel share sort of this concept, which again, Wes Anderson, another director I love, a lot of his movies do this, where you put it in one location, whether it's a submarine, a hotel, a train, and you can have all these different actors interact, these from different walks of life. You can have a priest and a prostitute, and a wealthy guy and a guy who just won the lottery or something all together. And it makes really an interesting story. And I really appreciate that about this movie. And I appreciate that Marlene Dietrich, just her and Anna May Wong, you said it, carry this movie. They're so compelling when they're on, and when they're in together, the scene where they're pulling the shades down in the room, it's like so very sexual, very erotic. Yeah, liminal spaces, a guy at my work is obsessed with it. Apparently it's a thing online right now. People like to go to old malls or old factory buildings that are broken down and film themselves hanging out in there. And it's
Urbex, Urban Exploration, or the Backrooms videos on YouTube. It's funny because I had heard of liminal space, I think, for the first time in grad school when we were talking about a Harlem Renaissance novel, God Send Sunday by Arna Bonton, that was set in a train. And then all of a sudden I've got my, kid when he was 10 talking about liminal space from hearing it on YouTube. So sometimes there is a little trickle down from the academy. But if you think about it, even in real life, you talked about the bus trip that we took at the beginning. Think about how weird it is when you travel, how it breaks your sense of comfort and normalcy, and you interact with all these people you never expected to interact with before, these little bite-sized interactions, like, to quote, I'd say, more problematic film, maybe Fight Club, when you have Ed Norton and Brad Pitt talking about the bite-sized friendships. But it's this great opportunity to play with type, to look and cast against type. I would say one of my favorite moments was when that woman, the one who runs the boarding house, tried to break in on, Shanghai Lily and Weifei. And, she's like, oh, I heard you playing the gramophone. And I thought how wonderful it would be to sit with you ladies. And I think Marlene Dietrich says, don't you find respectable people terribly dull? Like, yes, I've got this jazz age signifier going on in here, but you have misread it. It is not about me inviting you for a good time. It's about me showing that I am challenging sort of, mainstream cultural norms. King says in her after commentary, there's a shot of Dietrich where she's almost hagiography. It's like she's a saint, despite her being a prostitute, which now is a trope that's been so overwrought, it's almost done to death. But at this time, can you imagine how fresh and rich it might have seemed to audiences to have the main character be this, she's better than the man that she loves. What is he, a doctor? He's a man of science. And she takes the sting right out of him by being the one who's more steadfast and more loving and more willing to sacrifice for that love.
Yeah, and her trust that he's going to come around. He doesn't need to know that I put my neck on the line for him. Like, as a matter of fact, telling him that isn't going to help. He needs to come to the conclusion on his own. Yeah, she's definitely in control of her environment and what's happening. And as a character, I think she's fascinating and fantastic. The Hayes office kept a close watch on this film, as you could probably imagine, but particularly on the portrayal of Reverend Carmichael and the depiction of the Chinese Revolution. Reverend Carmichael, he's a fascinating character too. And I don't know if it's the Hayes Code pushing on them or if it was always their intent of, like, he comes across as this fanatic. He's the first one, I think, to really denounce both of these women on the train at the beginning. And by the end, he's the guy who is on their side. He's their ally. Like, he sees her praying and he is able to look past her being a prostitute, which I think is really interesting for this Christian character, like, who traditionally, you're a prostitute. That's it. You're a bad person.
Yeah, well, he went from Old Testament to New Testament, right? Because Jesus loved Mary Magdalene. I mean, I feel like, too, maybe he's a certain kind of audience stand-in, and maybe that's a way that Sternberg or the writer or both are kind of thumbing their nose at the arbitrary restrictions of Hays Code. Like, you might think representing sexuality, especially sex for money, as being this craven pre-code sleaze, but in reality, she's our protagonist. She's the one who makes the great sacrifice. She's the one who prays in the dark and not in public. And that kind of public versus private, performative behavior versus authentic behavior is something I think we see in so many realist and modernist texts. And if the priest has this change of heart, then so should we.
Right. Anna May Wong, I guess, she was a Hollywood actress. She'd been in a bunch of things. It's probably why she was able to get this role in this movie and why they didn't just do a woman in yellow face. I've asked this in 3 out of 4 episodes. I'm going to ask again. Toni, have you ever seen the movie Babylon?
No, I have not seen this movie.
It's not a great movie, but I keep bringing it up because it covers this time period. And there's a character in there, which I didn't realize till watching Shanghai Express, that is basically Anna May Wong in Babylon, and kind of showing her struggles navigating Hollywood. A movie like this and a movie like Grand Hotel, it's just interesting seeing all of these kind of strong actors put together and just let go. Clive Owen was in a bad movie from a previous Oscars, East Lynne. I think his role in this movie is very interesting, as this kind of stoic guy who still loves her. And even after finding out she was a prostitute, he still clearly likes her and he's defending her, although he's kind of on the fence if he's going to stay that way.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of interesting, complicated characters in this, and I love stories where you take kind of an oddball cast and put them the locked room. These guys are all stuck together, and they're a family for a little period of time. I felt like the gambler never had anything to do. I wonder if he had a bigger part that was cut. The boarding house woman I read, and this is interesting to people who live in Rhode Island, was based on Lucy Aldrich, a philanthropist and art collector from Providence who donated much of her collection to the RISD Museum. This is based on essentially a true story, the Lin Shang incident from May 6, 1923, in which a warlord captured the Shanghai to Beijing Express train and took 25 Westerners, including Lucy Aldrich, hostage. They all were set free. So I don't know. I doubt this movie is documentary following that, but I think it's it's inspired by it.
I think King asks in her after commentary on the Criterion video, what is the purpose of even having this set in Shanghai? And I would say at this moment, Shanghai or China in general is acting as both threat and promise, more of a symbol than a place. When a writer or an artist invokes the East, even still true today, they're trying to insert in the audience's mind this idea of the possibility of things being upended, of your expectations being upended. This is a place to go where the rules maybe don't apply. There were some real problems with anti-Chinese sentiment, which I already mentioned briefly with the media in terms of 5-star final. There was serious anti-Chinese and anti-Asian sentiment going on to the point of violent crime. This yellow peril was kind of what people were talking about and making these awful editorial cartoons. As soon as you have that gong at the beginning and the smoke is coming up, I think I wrote in the margins when I was taking notes, is this about opium? Because even before we meet the opium dealer, a lot of Americans, that's all they hear. When they think China, they think, oh my God, it's dangerous, there's opium. But the way it's used in here is more like we're entering you into, well, one word that I learned from King that I now love, a heterocosm. We're entering into this other world, this imaginary world. And so Shanghai is a device here. And there's a line from a character that says, well, you're in China now where time and life have no value. So it's this super modernist, super liminal space thing where it's not just like you're out of your everyday space, but you're out of your everyday time, because this is like a 3-day train ride. Everything's disrupted. Their entire routine, both in sense of time and in sense of place, is in flux. That's what allows the priest to have this change of heart, is that he's put in such close connection to the prostitute, you know?
That King commentary, I recommend to everybody, because I consider myself okay, a little smart. And I know you're very smart and you're learning words from her. I thought it was such an intelligent commentary, and it answered all of those questions I was having about, like, how should I feel about
Can I
this?
like this?
Yeah. Is it okay that I like this? Because of Warner Oland playing the Swede playing Yellowface.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, he was the bad guy too. So he's the most
Yeah.
problematic, but he's also the most kind of disposable. He's just our antagonist that, I don't know. I mean,
He's trying to sleep with our white women.
but what he gets killed for is assaulting the Chinese woman. So it's not just about trying to get with the white women. It's also, he's a bad man. You know, he's trying to use these women who, I think at the beginning, there was a line where somebody said, oh, I want to ride with a woman like that. So he's just the most extreme of all the male gazes that we have that look on these women and see them more as an object than a person.
This movie is the first movie that's challenged me to, because I typically think if there's some kind of race thing going on, like someone in blackface or someone in yellowface or red face or whatever, I'm usually like, okay, I'm not going to like this movie because the director's probably racist. That is just an like a signifier. Okay, this guy's in blackface. There's probably other things in this movie that are more subtle that are racist, you know? Mm-hmm. And this movie really challenged me, because this isn't just a good movie. This is a great movie. That is racist, no matter how you look at it, that casting. And you can point to a lot of things like, well, it's the time and they're using Hollywood actors. Anna May Wong was a Hollywood actor. That's how she got the role. Maybe there wasn't an equally famous enough Chinese actor working in Hollywood at the time that they could easily plug in there. Werner Oland, I read, had been playing Yellowface in a ton of other movies previous to this. So that was kind of his jam, you know? Good for you, I guess, man. But it's a great movie. And I really did enjoy it. But I am glad I had that commentary afterwards.
I mean, you wonder, too, how conscious the director is of working within or against that Yellowface trope, because one of the things that King mentions in the after commentary that I was very happy to hear was, as I'm watching the opening credits, I'm thinking, what is this Chinese restaurant font? Like, what is this? And she mentioned the exact same thing. And I was like, okay, so we're supposed to be seeing this. Are we supposed to be seeing it because it's playing to our baser natures of like, ooh, this is going to be exotic? Or are we supposed to be set up to think that, and then challenge that it's actually a deeper story, not necessarily reinforcing all the stereotypes, but maybe playing with them in some way to question our sort of snap judgments about people, whether it's a Chinese woman or just a woman in general who defies these politics of respectability, you know? Marlene Dietrich, though, without her, I don't know if this would have worked. She's so gorgeous. Her eyes, she can act with her eyes in a way that I feel like other actresses can't. There was a moment in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde where he's like courting his fiance and she's supposed to be looking at him all seductively. And I hate to say it, but her face just looked totally blank to me. But this kiss that she has on the train before the train station kiss, oh my gosh, like her eyes are delivering so much emotion. You can feel the hesitation and anticipation and just romance. It's gorgeous. I loved it.
I love movies where at the beginning lets you know where it's going to end. Because there's that part of you when you sit down to a movie, you're like, how long is this movie going to be? Even when you're looking forward to. So Shanghai Express, you're like, it's a train ride to Shanghai. So in the back of your head, you're like, okay, the movie's going to end when they get to Shanghai. Love that when a movie can do that for me. Like, oh, my anticipation. Okay, now you can be as long as you want. I know what the journey is. It's like when the
Right.
movie starts and they're like, everyone dies at the end. And you're like, oh boy, this is going to be a tough one. Like, how did they all die? You know,
Right. Right.
The Terror, the television show, one of my favorite television shows ever. They tell you in the first episode, yeah, these guys all die. And you're like, ugh, loved it. All right, let's move up. I think we just talked for about that movie for 45 minutes.
She's so good.
She's so, yeah. Is there
Feel the
anything you
hype as
left
well.
out you want to tack on to this? Because I
No, I'm ready to move to my other beau, Maurice.
my other Bo. Brother Bo, 1 hour with you. We're back, baby. Maurice Chevalier, March 22nd, 1932. This is directed by Ernst Lubitsch and George Cukor. I will say here, George Cukor was originally going to direct this movie. He might have directed some of it. He had a lot of problems with Maurice Chevalier on the set. They were not working well together, and he was removed, and Ernst Lubitsch came in and finished the movie. So presumably did most of the work. So it's really an Ernst Lubitsch movie, I think. You George Cukor fans out there can at me in the comment section if I'm wrong on that. I watched this on Criterion. My Criterion set I've been recommending. Tony, how'd you watch this one?
I think I paid for it on Prime.
Worth it.
Worth it very much.
80 minutes. This starred Jeanette MacDonald as Colette Berthier. Jeanette MacDonald also starred in The Love Parade. So these two have been paired together before. Maurice Chevalier as Dr. Andre Berthier and Genevieve Tobin as Mitzi. This was nominated once for Best Picture. That's it. Parisian Dr. Andre Berthier loves his wife Colette, and they explain how much they love having sex with each other whenever they want in a delightful song to start the film. But when Colette's best frenemy, Mitzi, arrives to visit and throws herself at Andre looking for an affair, he does his best to not cheat on his wife. 1 hour with you, the title, refers to the amount of time a hookup would amount to and how great it would be, also told to us in another delightful song midway through the film. But Mitzi is also married, and her husband has hired a private detective to watch after her, unbeknownst to everyone. A subplot with Andre's homosexual friend possibly assaulting Colette or not, it isn't clear if she dreamed it or not, adds a weird layer of tension that ties into the resolution. Andre ends up cheating, is immediately caught, Colette finds out soon after, and she uses her possible dream assault as a means to claim the scales have been balanced and everything worked out great because they both cheated, even though Andre definitely banged Mitzi, and Colette, at most, received an unwanted kiss. The end. Tony, was that a dream? Am I misunderstanding?
I don't know. I didn't even know he was gay. I mean,
all the jokes. Boris Chevalier, every time he'd be like, him, like laughing at the camera. They were setting that up. That
I just thought it was because nobody could compare to Chevalier.
No, that was totally like some gay coding, early pre-code gay coding. Like I've seen this in a lot of the Hitchcock films too.
I mean, maybe it was a dream, or maybe the guy was trying to not be gay because at that time it was so hard to live as gay, so maybe he thought it would be a safe experiment. But it is kind of a weak comparison to actual cheating, whether it was a dream or just a subtle attempt, to maybe do something. It's funny because you mentioned how 1 hour is the amount of time it would take for a hookup. But when the guy timed, Chevalier in the cab with his wife's friend, it was actually more like 8 minutes.
Yeah, but then they go up to the apartment and that's like 2.5 hours, right? Or was it like, there was never 1 hour.
It's just delightful. I mean, pre-code sleaze, as somebody on Letterboxd said. There's so many great lines. I have this thing here where I put catty bitches because one of them says, "Oh, you look great. You must have gained."
Oh, yeah.
The repartee in these Lubitsch films is just top notch. I mean,
that whole intro I felt like was a middle finger to the Hays Code. They're making out in the park and the cops bring them back, and then Maurice Chevalier looks right at the camera and starts telling us how actually this is on you because what we did was acceptable because we're married and we're allowed to do that, and I can go into this bedroom and have sex with her right now. It's totally cool because we're totally married. That felt to me like Lubitsch being like, "Oh, I'm so sick of dealing with this Hays guy. Guess what? They're married. They can do whatever they want."
There's a lot of directly addressing the audience that I noticed in here. And there's definitely a lot of jazz age playing around with promiscuity. I mean, one of the things I think is funny about the code and the politics of respectability more generally is how much of it centers around sexuality, but not necessarily around violence. sexuality and the body and a woman's leg draped over the side of the bed is so challenging, but in reality, these are things everyone in the audience could resonate with. It reminded me a little bit of, because he's a doctor, and women love doctors, which I think we have some other doctors throughout here that can maybe court women beyond their rank, which even in the last one, Shanghai Express, Dietrich is stepping down with that dude, in my opinion. She could do better. But there's some blues songs that came out around this time, and they all are centered around dentists, like toothache blues. And the whole idea is he can drill me for so long, and they're really bawdy and over the top. Even in like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, right? The doctor comes and it's like, oh, doctor. Because honestly, for a woman who's suffering from a lack of intimacy, that's a perfect opportunity. Especially married women aren't necessarily seen as objects of intimacy as much as they are objects of like sterile domestic motherhood. So even making a domestic couple, make out in a public park feels still so progressive and unexpected and exciting, I loved it.
I think the music in this one I liked a lot better than in The Smiling Lieutenant. My edge probably goes to The Smiling Lieutenant for which one of these two I like. I wonder if competing against himself, like with two movies, it's both movies' chances to win Best Picture, because your mind kind of does go to, well, which one of these two is better? And they're both really great. I don't buy Maurice Chevalier in any job. Oh, he's a doctor. He's in the military. No, he's not. This guy could not do any of these jobs. If Maurice Chevalier walked in and he's my doctor and I'm a guy, I'm like, oh God, is there anyone else back there? Like someone who knows medicine.
Yeah. Don't ever have your wife come into the office,
It's almost funny, these movies, that they're just like, come up with a crazy job. Maurice Chevalier, yeah, he does this job. He's a cobbler. He couldn't do it. I don't believe it. All he can do is hit on women, and there's no one better than him. He's like Don Draper. Like he can, with one or two lines, he's got the woman won over. The Smiling Lieutenant, it's with a smile. All he's going to do is tell her, I smiled because I liked you. Oh my God, I got to marry that guy. This movie, I didn't like the actress playing Mitzi. First of all, his wife is way better looking than Mitzi. But that scene where they're in the cab at the beginning of the movie where he's flirting with her, I was like, this guy has so much game. He's got that little hat on, that little white, what do they call those things? Are they boater hats? Or they just look so cute. I think she says something too that I thought would play in, where she says, does it matter if we cheated or not? We were alone in the cab. Like they're all going to think it. So I kind of thought the movie was going to end with him going up to her house and maybe they didn't have an affair, but that playing out, that who would believe they didn't? But the movie, maybe that's the Ernst Lubitsch touch of him just being like, oh no, they totally had an affair.
Yeah.
And his wife stays with him. What a shocker. The Lubitsch touch wins again.
Yeah. I mean, that's also Chevalier. I mean, he's so charming. She's like, sure, I had a fantasy about an affair with your gay friend. Whatever. Don't leave me.
Yeah, it's like she's struggling to accept it, to be like, I'm not leaving him. So how do I make this like I was mad and it worked out? Well, we might have cheated. I know. Well, to her, it happened. He knows it didn't, though. The music in this movie was really good. That whole the 1 Hour with You song, like when they're at the dance, I just think it's funny to throw a party and then to have a band play a song about having an affair at your house. Like, just feels kind of weird.
I think there's a poem, it might be Robert Herrick, To the Virgins Make Much of Time. I feel like there's a real vibe, and maybe this is a jazz age vibe, after the First World War, where people are faced with the reality of mortality, the frailty of life, and how it could end at any time, that it's like, let's just go get it. Let's just play around, because spring is in the air, and spring is just one season. There's going to be definitely a season for like Bad Girl having a kid that you're miserable about having for a little bit. So while you can, let's have fun. I do think your comment about the two films splitting the vote, I wonder if that's also the best actor situation, if maybe he didn't, not that I think he's the best actor ever, but he's incredibly charming, not just knowing the fact that he was mourning over his mother's death in the previous one. He's delivering lines that could otherwise be read as deeply misogynistic, very formulaic, and delivering them in a way where you can see his charm. You can see this playing around with fidelity is not just a man being a dog, but actually playing. you know.
In both of these movies, they came out within a year of each other. His mother had just died. He's going through all this stuff. And you think this is a melancholy guy off screen. And he's putting in these performances that, they look easy, but it's not easy because I can't even think of another actor who's done what he's done. Yeah, I don't know. I really liked this one as well. You ready to move on?
Yeah. Oh, the final one, Grand Hotel. I've got like 4 pages of notes.
Grand Hotel. Now, this movie, it came out last, so that's why we're talking about it last, not just because it won, but it almost seems fitting that we talk about this one last because it kind of is like wraps up everything else with a bow. Came out April 12th, 1932, directed by Edmund Golding. I watched this on Amazon. I paid the $2.99 for it. How about you?
Same. Worth it.
Worth it. Length, 112 minutes. Starring actress Greta Garbo as Grusinskaya, the dancer. John Barrymore as Baron Felix von Gagern. Actress Joan Crawford as Flemchen, the stenographer. Actor Wallace Beery as General Director Preissing. And actor Lionel Barrymore as Otto Kringeline. This was nominated once, believe it or not, just for Best Picture, and it won. Dr. Otterenschlag, a disfigured veteran of World War I and a permanent resident of the Grand Hotel in Berlin, observes people coming, going, nothing ever happens, after which a great deal transpires. Baron Felix von Gagern, who squandered his fortune and supports himself as a card player and occasional jewel thief, befriends Otto Kringeline, a dying accountant who has decided to spend his remaining days in the lap of luxury. Kringeline's former employer, industrialist General Director Preissing, is at the hotel to close an important deal, and he hires stenographer Flemchen to assist him. She aspires to be an actress and shows Preissing some magazine photos for which she has posed. Another guest is Russian ballerina Grusinskaya, whose career is on the wane. When the Baron is in the room to steal her jewelry, after she returns from the theater, he overhears her contemplating suicide. This is a Wikipedia review, by the way. Sorry. He comes out of hiding and engages her in conversation. The two fall in love and spend the night together. The following morning, the Baron returns Grusinskaya's jewels, and she forgives the crime. She invites him to accompany her to Vienna, an offer he accepts. The Baron is desperate for money to pay his way out of the criminal group he has been working with. He and Kringeline start a card game, and Kringeline wins everything, but becomes intoxicated. When he drops his wallet, the Baron stashes it in his pocket, intending to keep not only the winnings, but the funds that will see Kringeline through the last weeks of his life. But moved by the sight of Kringeline's despair, the Baron, who did desperately need the money, pretends to have discovered the wallet and returns it. As part of a desperate merger plan, Preissing, Wallace Beery must travel to England, and he asks Flemchen to accompany him. The insinuation is kind of a little like a concubine kind of a situation. Later, when they're in a room together, he sees a shadow of the Baron rifling through his belongings. He confronts the Baron, the two struggle, and Preissing bludgeons the Baron with the telephone, killing him. Flemchen sees what happens, tells Kringeline. He confronts Preissing, who insists he acted in self-defense, but Kringeline still summons the police, and Preissing is arrested. In the end, Grusinskaya departs for the train station. There's a lot of big names in this movie, these character names. Expecting to find the Baron waiting for her there. Meanwhile, Kringeline offers to take care of Flemchen, who suggests they seek a cure for his illness. As they leave the hotel, Dr. Otterenschlag again observes, Grand Hotel, always the same. People come, people go, nothing ever changes. Kind of a lot, but when you have a lot of characters in a movie like this, there's a lot of intersecting storylines. What'd you think of this movie?
I really loved it. When you said it only got nominated for the Best Picture, it kind of surprised me it didn't get nominated for cinematography. Like, I realized Shanghai Express was also gorgeous with its cinematography. Do you know who won that year for cinematography?
It was Shanghai Express won for cinematography.
I get it, but I'm a little surprised this didn't even get a nod. There was an opening shot that reminded me of like an M.C. Escher painting, this idea of a space that doesn't make sense, a space that's dizzying. It's like an overhead shot of the hotel lobby, which I think is a really nice setup for how we're going to, again, have this very liminal space of what happens in a hotel lobby that's just like a train. It's a perfect opportunity for people of all walks of life to get together and interact and maybe challenge some of those types and boundaries and hierarchies that we might think of in everyday life. That was fantastic to me. There's just so many good lines. I thought it was interesting, the lines that you quoted from the guy who got his face scarred in World War One. There's often in literature this idea of the scarred person or the fool as being, sort of the voice of conscience of a story or the voice of truth. So as soon as he said that, he's at the bar and he's like so sort of sullen, nihilistic almost. People come, people go. That was when I knew this is going to be more than just big name Hollywood actors telling us a romantic story. This is going to somehow be deep.
I think there was a lot of talk that John Barrymore was snubbed. There was a behind the scenes thing saying John Barrymore was on the outs with Louis B. Mayer, and that's why he didn't get nominated for this movie. So there might still be some Academy shenanigans at play to prevent people. But I honestly, for me watching it, I almost wish they had a supporting character role, because I thought his brother Lionel Barrymore killed it as Otto Kringelheim.
Yes.
He was so good throughout that movie. And he had so many of the best lines and speeches, where he's yelling at his boss, like, you can't control me.
Yes.
Like, he was so good. Did you know he is the villain in It's a Wonderful Life? He's the bank owner who steals the money from Jimmy Stewart.
He's an excellent actor. His lines were some of my favorite because it's almost like the same way that liminal space can operate to upend hierarchies. With his limited time left, he's giving the most glorious FU to his boss ever, not just by publicly shaming him in the hotel bar, but by taking the girl that he tried to get.
His storyline just has the strongest arc in the movie. He gets to report the guy to the police at the end. And there's so many scenes of him not knowing things. Like, what's that drink he keeps ordering? Because it's the first time he's gotten presumably like a good drink. For fans of this show who want to spend the rest of their days and the rest of their money in a hotel drinking what Kringelheim was drinking, the drink in question was the Louisiana Flip. So what is this drink? Well, according to Catherine Smith from her Cocktail of the Week website on bootleggers, flips were popular in the early 20th century, and the category includes any drink shaken with an egg in it. It could be made with brandy, port wine, sherry, or whiskey. Basically, here's your directions for you to make at home and drink along as we continue with this episode. 2 ounces of white rum, 1/2 ounce of Cointreau, 1/2 ounce of orange juice or clementine juice, 2 bar spoons of grenadine, and 1 egg. Place all ingredients into a mixing glass, shake vigorously without ice for 15 to 30 seconds until foamy. Add ice and shake for a further 30 to 60 seconds until very cold and foamy. And you too can get drunk like Otto Kringelheim. Back to you, Kenny. And he keeps trying to order it for other people, and they're like, no, we don't want that drink. The guy with the scars, like, yeah, you got to get better clothes. You're going to hang out here. Like, they're slowly pretty womaning him.
Yes.
Like, okay, if you're going to live this life. I really thoroughly enjoyed his story. And I thought John Barrymore was good in sort of a little bit of a Maurice Chevalier way of, like, his interactions with the women. I loved that his character was always honest. Like, they're like, what are you doing here? Well, I'm robbing you. I'm taking your purse. That's so refreshing because there's no wasted time of pretending like it was something else and then they find out. Like, he's just like almost in the same way as Kringelheim. He's like living in the moment and just rolling the dice. He just comes up snake eyes at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the interesting thing about knowing you're at the end of your life. Barrymore's character might not know he's at the end. There's this idea that is it only until we are close to death that we can abandon pretense, or does abandoning pretense precipitate our death if we've lived this life of intrigue? I don't know. I mean, I think he did a good job, but it was really his brother who I was watching throughout most of the movie. And they were all strong. Honestly, Garbo, for being this huge name, didn't compel me as much as I had expected. I was really pleasantly surprised with Joan Crawford. I think my first notes were a stenographer, double question mark. This queen is just a secretary, because you're expecting so much when you see her on the screen, and you think, like so many of our movies had presented 2 women, right? The dark-haired woman and the blonde, the Madonna and the whore, the 2 aspects of womanhood, good or bad. And some of the movies challenge that, like Shanghai Express did. And this movie, again, challenges it. The working girl is the one who we follow the most. Because, yeah, Garbo's a dancer, and that's kind of working, but it's not the same hard middle or lower class work that a stenographer would be, but she still can steal a scene, like nobody else.
Yeah, Greta Garbo is actually one of the few of these characters that's actually, it kind of is independently wealthy. Like she is a star, presumably she has tons of money. And like, yeah, Joan Crawford is basically that pre-code prostitute, really. I mean, you want maybe that's what she was hired for under that initial, maybe it wasn't as a stenographer, maybe she was recommended because that she would do that, travel with him. I mean, he's certainly hitting on her, I think, right from the beginning, like the first time she's taking notes for him. Wallace Beery's performance it reminded me of Ray Fiennes in the Grand Budapest Hotel, like, which is a movie we talked about a little after you saw this. Like, does this movie inspire Grand Budapest Hotel? And sure enough, it is listed as one of the movies that Wes Anderson had available for people to watch as an inspiration for that movie. And I see a lot of that. They have the lobby boy hats, essentially. I know in Budapest they just say lobby boy, but in this they look exactly the same, but they say whatever the name of the hotel is. And the way they stand in line, like there's a lot of little visual cues that, and again, just like Shanghai Express, this kind of makes sense because this movie is filmed really well and it has all of these particular things about the hotel. The lobby is like this giant circle, right? Like it's out in the open where everyone is kind of able to be around it. Again, another beautiful looking movie. It had great performances, probably a better ensemble than Shanghai Express.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it was as tight as Shanghai Express was story-wise. I think when you're dealing with all these different narratives, some are working maybe better than others. Like we can both single out Lionel Barrymore's storyline as kind of being the most compelling, strongest part of the movie. But you're also dealing with, this Greta Garbo, she will or she won't perform. And she does kind of have the weakest role outside of her interactions with John Barrymore. She doesn't really interact with the other characters, and she's kind of this accessory to the story. I didn't even realize the line she says in it. I want to be alone or whatever.
Right.
I didn't even remember that. And then I read afterwards, it's one of the 100 most famous lines in Hollywood movies. So like, I guess, I think that's more associated with her as the actor.
Right.
Real life. To which
Yeah.
she said something smart like, she didn't mean I want to be alone. She meant I wanted to be left alone. And there's a difference between being alone and people leaving you alone, which I get. I totally get that.
Yeah, I do too. It's funny because when you mention the two of them, because she's on Veronal, I guess, which is like Ambien for back then. So I was like, disheveled junkie dancer and sexy working girl secretary. That's the yin yang of limited roles for women. I mean, maybe it's just the amount of lines or screen time, but Crawford is able to break out of that limiting role. Garbo, at least in this film, we don't really get to see her break beyond just this. She moves from kind of one addiction to the other, right? Oh, I'm addicted to these pills, but now somebody loves me and I'm addicted to the idea of them loving me, but then they die, so whatever. One of the things I wanted to point out that I thought was really interesting is it's not just Otto that we see this working class discontent. We also see it in this initial opening scene. We've got all the operators, plugging in the phones, trying to get people to communicate. But the hotel clerk, he can't get any, he's trying to call about his wife in labor. He can't get off work. He can't get a hold of anybody to tell him what's going on. So there's this early 20th century idea that despite having access to the telephone and all these new modern ways to communicate, there's all these failures of communication, both literal and metaphoric, where people are having a hard time talking to one another, perhaps because they're not being honest. But also, that same desk worker says at one point he feels like he's just another desk slave, like he's chained to the desk. So we keep getting this idea reinforced that while some people get to travel at leisure, other people have to either prostitute themselves or steal or maybe be dying and win the lottery to make that happen. Yeah. And that's a pretty scathing critique for 1932 or whatever,
I think part of me is also, though, it's starting that Hollywood mythology of luck. You got to make your own future, and that you could be at the Grand Hotel, if you were just confident. And like, I think it's the lie of Hollywood, which is that not all of us are going to win the lottery,
Right.
And they're going to move away from using thieves and prostitutes as like your way into that class. And
Mhm.
instead they're going to use sort of hard work and determination, right? So
Right.
we can't just tell you selling your body and stealing will make you a millionaire. So we're going to tell you that if you work real hard,
Right.
you'll be at the Grand Hotel. And I feel like that is damaging because no, you're not getting up there by working really hard. It's very rare. It's like being struck by lightning that you end up like Elon Musk or something. Really, I appreciate movies like The Champ a little bit more in that the honesty of that. You know, there's a guy who worked really hard and dies, you know, at the end.
Right. Yeah, died working basically.
Died working. This movie, even though it does have a lot of pre-code elements, feels like the arrow point of where Hollywood is planning on going. It's no surprise this movie was produced by Louis B. Mayer. He gave a super long speech accepting the award for it at the Oscars.
I like what you say there about, how the myth ends up moving towards hard work and what's behind the scenes and the producers. Because one of the notes I put was a question was, who was the Harvey Weinstein of this day? I bet Joan Crawford has a lot of stories. I mean, all I really know of her from before this, honestly, is whatever happened to Baby Jane, some shows that they've done about her life since then. And I think they did one with Susan Sarandon playing somebody her opposite maybe, but Mommy Dearest, so I know all these representations of Joan Crawford as incredibly difficult. But then I look at this role that she's given, this very limited role in some ways that she does as much as she can with. And I think maybe one of the unfortunate things about the code is that those roles become even more limited. We don't get to see women trying to break out of type. We move into a very sort of middle class celebratory thing that Sinclair Lewis was railing against. So I don't know a ton about the movies that come right after this, but if you're looking forward to like the mid-century, the whole motion picture industry seems to be moving towards a containment narrative, which I still think a lot of the mainstream movies haven't broken out of. I mean, if you're looking at boxing narratives, The Champ made way back then feels way more of a interesting class critique than something like Cinderella Man, which argues just allow your body to get beat to death. It's okay. Then you'll find your success.
That's where I have a problem with like a movie like Barbie, which I really love. But at the end of the day, it's owned by this corporate interest that's then going to sell all of those ideas and concepts right back to you by selling you a Barbie version of it,
Right.
So it's like, and nothing in the real world really changes. But it is funny you mentioned that we're heading towards Ozzie and Harriet 1950s women in the home. And this, if you compare that to where we're going, the Don Draper beginning of Mad Men era, like these, like it's sad because it's like there was a freedom developing and like I felt like there was great ideas. Sound era of film was starting to break out and get more creative and tell more down to earth stories. And that all is going to get shut down. And we're going to get this Hollywood fantasy shoved down our throats and women having to behave a particular way and men having to behave a particular way too. It's not really the best of ways, but being the breadwinner and the sort of dominant force in the household.
And you wonder how much of the Hays Code was about that. How much of it was truly about morality and how much of it was actually about squashing any critique that could threaten the already entrenched power structure.
Right. Well, I definitely think the Hays Code started as a money thing because they could show their movies in more places because all of these Christian groups and Catholic groups were coming up and saying they were going to boycott or ban the movie or whatever. So they were trying to make money. So they were like, well, we don't want to upset those groups. But by the time the Hays Code goes into effect, it's basically you're acting in the interest of those groups now, where they're just telling you, don't put these things in. And you're like, okay, they're not going in.
Yeah.
We're going to come back to us together. Oh, hey, we're back. Okay, we got a job to do. This show isn't just about talking about these movies. We have to make crucial decisions about what happened in history and can we correct them right here. So the first one we're going to talk about is the Best Actor Award, which was tied between Frederick March playing Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and between Wallace Beery playing the Champ. Andy the Champ Purcell. So, are you ready to award the Golden Boy and see where we land on this? It was a tie historically. Will the tie be broken? And all right, in three, the winner of Best Actor for the Academy Award, the Golden Boy goes to.
I created a new tie.
It's still a tie.
I added Maurice Chevalier.
And the Golden Boy for Best Actor goes to Frederick March, Wallace Beery, and Maurice Chevalier. We tried to fix it, but we made it much, much worse. Hats off to the boys.
You know, initially I was going to pick Beery because I loved the champ, but then when you told me how he wasn't nice to little Jackie Cooper.
Oh, the behind the scenes stuff.
So as long as Maurice Chevalier doesn't get Me Too'd, let's give it to my boy.
I feel like he would if we had the news cycle back then. I'm sure there's a lot of Maurice Chevalier stories out there. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I just thought Frederick March, there was something, he had a challenging role. Maybe I just bought into, okay, he had to put on makeup and Johnny Depp it and really sell us this other character. I enjoyed him. I mean, I think they both deserved the Oscar. I don't think that one of them got screwed. It wasn't a Mary Pickford situation where it was a bad performance and it won. I think they both were great. That was the thing I wanted to talk about at the head of this episode. Before we go on too far, this show is about recommending movies you should watch. But if you're a film historian, or if you're someone like me who just wants to watch everything, then you should watch everything. Like all these movies we just watched, I feel like you should watch. I feel better having watched all of these movies, right? We're going to recommend, though, some of them to what I would say the people who are more discerning. You don't have a lot of time in your day. You can't be watching Arrowsmith. You can't sit down. You don't have time for that movie. So we're going to tell you the ones you should watch from here. And we're going to obviously tell you who will win the Golden Boy. So I just wanted to make that clear to people. Like, the best case scenario, and I know there are people that listen to the show, watch the show, that do watch all of the movies. That is, honestly, the ideal way to do it. Because we're just giving opinions here, family. So, without further ado, the Golden Boy for... Got in my special envelope. The music is playing right now, Tony. We can't hear it, but it's playing. The Golden Boy for the 5th Academy Awards goes to Shanghai Express and the Champ. And the 5th Golden Boy for Best Picture goes to 2 movies in split decision. The Champ by King Vidor and Shanghai Express by Joseph von Sternberg. Sorry again, Louis B. Drown your sorrows with a Louisiana flip.
It just really surprised me. Of all the boxing narratives, of all my resistance to watching a sports film, period, the relationship and the dynamic between parent and child taking care of one another just hit me right, in my cold, dead heart. Shanghai Express is definitely up there. Grand Hotel's great. It's not that it's not great. It's absolutely great. Yeah. It's just, I think it checked a lot of boxes that would allow the Academy. All those big name stars. So the little things that I was looking for, like, class critiques or whatever, I'm going to look for that because that's my bias. But I truly doubt that was the way it was marketed or received.
I thought those 3 were the best movies. I thought I would recommend all 3 of those. Shanghai Express, The Champ, Grand Hotel.
Any of those 4 would be in my top 4 that I would recommend if you had limited time. But Chevalier, I mean, he's just so devastatingly charming. He's so worth the watch. So while the movies, I think, don't necessarily stand out individually, he stands out individually, and I would watch anything else he was in ever.
I definitely recommend, if you think you don't like musicals, to watch one of these movies. Which one would you pick of the 2? Smiling Lieutenant or 1 Hour with You?
I would probably say Smiling Lieutenant, just because I loved that scene between the 2 women that were vying for him, and I would love to see it remade.
I like that Lubitsch creates his own countries. Like you're talking about that with Shanghai Express, where it's kind of this fantasy version of China.
Yeah, heterocosm.
Where Lubitsch is just like, I'm just going to name, whatever, Flausensturm or something. And just we're not even going to get into, where are we? It's a totally made up place. Yeah, I would go Shanghai Express was my number 1. Grand Hotel is probably my number 2. Champ, number 3. These are so tight. All 3 of these movies were better than most of the movies at previous Academy Awards. I think they're all worth watching for anybody. Scarface might have won. It might have, if that were in here. My thing with Shanghai Express was I asked myself at the end of the day, I'm like, without being political about it, like without being like, well, this movie deserves to win, or I love King Vidor and I love the crowd. I should pick the champ. There's not a lot I can get blasted for with that movie because it's so good. Whereas like Shanghai Express, you have this racist element to it. But I was just like, at the end of the day, I just really enjoyed Shanghai Express. And like, I thought it was a beautiful looking movie, unlike anything really from this time that I've seen. It helps you have a beautiful actress.
She's got this inner strength, and I feel like that's what she really delivered, and so did her counterpart in that, and is it Anime Wong?
Anime Wong, yeah.
Both of them have such inner strength, and King showed this picture of the two of them both dressed up in a suit and talking about their relationship and their chemistry. And I thought, here are two women who just said, F it. I'm going to be who I am, regardless of the expectations that Hollywood is putting on me. And I know Wong did try to get some training because they said her accent from California was too strong, but
it's kind of funny. I'm picturing like a Valley Girl like accent or something. I know they probably didn't have that back then, but
Shanghai Express is really, really good. Without Jackie Cooper, I don't know if I would have given the award to the champ.
I feel bad that I ever said anything bad about him before.
Good.
He was fantastic in that movie. King Vidor. I'm definitely interested in watching more of his movies outside of Oscar nominated things. And same thing with Von Sternberg. I'm looking forward to watching the rest of these Marlene Dietrich movies. Like, these feel like confident filmmakers, and they're going to make the movie they want regardless of the code. It'll be sad, hopefully good, to see how they manage going forward, when they're really starting to get their hands tied. And I got 5-star final, Bad Girl, and Arrowsmith rounding out the end, my last three. I don't recommend those movies.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to do a comprehensive look at media, critiquing media, then yeah, 5-star final might be a good early example just to touch and check off that base. Although, who is it? Is it Boris Karloff was Isopod in that?
Yeah, Boris Karloff as the dressing as the priest to sneak into their house like a dirtbag.
He's always fun to watch.
He's in Scarface. He is the rival mob boss in Scarface, and he's excellent in that as well. That's the subtext of this episode. Is you got
watch Scarface.
Watch Scarface. Yeah, it was really good. Toni, thank you so much for doing this. This was awesome.
Thank you.
You're here. I should also mention before we go, I am the godfather to your son Bassie, who will love a shout out in this video. I'll put you a link to his YouTube channel down below. I think he's doing better than this channel still, to be honest.
His shorts actually do really well. I think shorts in general do really well. So maybe you should create a few little shorts.
I know. Yeah, we gotta branch out a little bit. You know what? No, I'm gonna say this. We got a small audience. It's a niche audience, and I'm happy with the people that we have because they watch these videos. I don't want a bunch of just lay people coming in here and this movie sucks. Toni, this was great. I'm so glad that you did this. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, and we will see everybody. Let me look at the camera. We'll see you in the next one. Keep those golden boys polished.
Hello, everyone. This is executive producer Jessa Goldstein here in the editing booth. Kenny is out waiting for the Great Pumpkin, so I'm here filling in the last few hours before this episode premieres. If you want to be a part of this niche family, hit like and subscribe, and hey, maybe leave a comment. Next episode of Golden Boy will premiere on December 1st and feature the 6th Academy Awards. Buckle up. Here's your homework. A Farewell to Arms by Frank Borzage. I Am a Fugitive on a Chain Gang by Mervyn LeRoy. Smilin' Through by Sidney Franklin. Cavalcade by Frank Lloyd. 42nd Street by Lloyd Bacon. Lady for a Day by Frank Capra. Little Women by George Cukor. The Private Life of Henry VIII by Alexander Korda. She Done Him Wrong by Lowell Sherman. And State Fair by Henry King. That's 10 movies, so you better get to work. Thanks for watching and listening, and we'll see you in a month.